The happy life of a fun seeker in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 276 Before the War. Tony finally gave Sherlock an address, a yacht. Just as he finished, a flash of golden light appeared before him, and the next second, a portal the size of a person appeared before his eyes, startling him. Tony's exclamation naturally attracted Roddy, who was standing guard outside the cabin. Almost as soon as Tony shouted, Roddy rushed in, pistol in hand. Looking at the portal inside the cabin, Roddy felt as if his entire world was shattered. Sherlock ignored Roddy's thoughts and, with a sullen expression, stepped through the portal and entered the cabin. The portal immediately closed behind Sherlock. "Have you located Killian?" Sherlock asked without hesitation. Tony finally realized what was happening. He glanced at Roddy beside him, then at Sherlock, who had just arrived, and the gleaming wand in his hand. His head ached like never before. He waved at Sherlock and said, "Not really. I've already activated all of Jarvis's computing power and contacted some of your people. We should be able to find Killian's hiding place soon." After hearing Tony's words, Sherlock nodded, still scowling, and then said, "Then I'll go get some sleep. Let me know when you find Killian." He ignored Tony's reaction and headed for a room on the yacht, even nodding to Rhodes as he passed. But it was clear that Rhodes had no intention of paying any attention to Sherlock. His jaw dropped to the ground. He didn't even react as he looked at Sherlock's retreating back, then at Tony, who stood there with a helpless look on his face. "What's wrong with him?" Tony patted Rhodes' shoulder with understanding and said to his friend, "Well, my expression was similar to yours when I first saw him use magic. You'll get used to it. Oh, and remember, don't tell anyone he's a wizard." With that, Tony immediately left the cabin and headed for Sherlock's room. He needed to know what was going on with Sherlock. He'd been with Sherlock for so long, and even during his own debauched days, he'd never seen Sherlock as angry as he was today. Tony almost instinctively sensed something was wrong with Sherlock's mood today. Concern for his only blood relative overshadowed everything else. Sherlock was the most important thing for Tony right now. It took a long time after Tony entered Sherlock's room for Rhodes to finally register what Tony had just said. What the hell? A wizard? Huh? At that moment, Rhodes' CPU was fuming slightly. After all, Rhodes had seen Sherlock before, but he had never imagined that Sherlock would be the godlike, omnipotent wizard from the Battle of New York. If you insist, Rhodes himself is actually a fan of wizards. My idol is my brother nephew? Even Hollywood wouldn't dare to film this plot like this. After Rhodes' CPU finally processed the information that was like a sea, Tony walked out of Sherlock's room with a dark face. Looking at Tony's gloomy face that seemed like water could drip, Rhodes was still Tony's good brother and immediately stepped forward to ask what happened. Facing Rhodes' inquiry, Tony looked at Rhodes with lingering fear, as if he was organizing his words. After a while, he said to Rhodes, "After I find Killian's location, before taking action, mobilize all your connections to evacuate the innocent people around." Things have gotten out of hand. After hearing Tony's words, Rhodes seemed a little unresponsive and said to Tony, "Hasn't this been a big deal for a long time? Ever since that Killian kidnapped the president. It's already a big deal. And War Machine's still in Killian's hands. I'm still a traitor, technically." Seeing Rhodes still struggling to grasp the situation, Tony shook his head helplessly before continuing. "It's different, Rhodes. Trust me, this is far more serious than you think. Can you imagine what a wizard's rage was like during the Battle of New York? Let me put it this way, Rhodes, Sherlock is amazing. If he wanted to, he could protect the entire city of New York and even keep casualties to a minimum. Similarly, if he wanted to, destroying New York would be a matter of minutes. Now things have gotten really serious. Killian has just stepped on Sherlock's bottom line. I'm afraid he won't be able to control his anger." After hearing Tony's words, Rhodes briefly thought about it, then shuddered violently. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and started calling one by one. Meanwhile, Tony began activating his last resort, the armor in the warehouse. He'd originally planned to use the armor to bury the past and deal with Killian's megalomania. But now, Tony had changed his mind. His focus wasn't on Killian anymore, but on Sherlock, now in a rage. Who knew what would happen to Sherlock, with his eyes fixed on Killian, when he saw him? Tony was genuinely terrified. And what frightened Tony most was Sherlock's magic. Tony had no way to counter that near rule of law power. He had even once experimented with Sherlock, secretly guiding him. Even the finest materials Tony had at his disposal, the Euroalloy from the Destroyer armor and the vibranium from Captain America's shield, could only partially mitigate Sherlock's magic. Even after Sherlock's magic reached a certain level of strength, these two items were essentially no different from any other random artifacts. So, if Tony were to truly face Sherlock's sanity, his only hope was that his blood ties and emotional bonds would somehow reassure him and bring him back to his senses. Otherwise, he'd have to rely on outnumbering Sherlock until he was exhausted. Beyond those two options, Tony couldn't find any other way to counter Sherlock. At that moment, Tony's anxiety, which had been cured by the little boy, was showing signs of recurring. Damn it, wasn't the armor enough? Chapter 277 Decisive Battle 1. Tony and Rhodes were both visibly nervous, and Sherlock wasn't much better off. Lying in bed, Sherlock felt as if a fire was burning in his heart. This fire threatened to burn its way up his spine and into his head. Sherlock could only use his strong rationality to suppress the rage. After all, Sherlock knew the devastating power of a reckless, full-throttle rage. Simply put, a single fire curse could burn half of New York to ash. It was quite remarkable that Sherlock hadn't initially felt anything for Killian. Especially when Killian had blown up Sherlock's gun shop, Sherlock had been more concerned with settling the score than with killing him. After all, in Sherlock's mind, friends and family were the most important things. The gun shop, the training ground, were merely external things. The real reason that drove Shylock so furious, to the point of wanting to kill Killian in the most painful way, was actually two things. The first was Antonia's arm. Despite promising to create a more functional arm tailored to Antonia's preferences, it wasn't the original. For Shylock, friends and loved ones could be hurt, but there was always a limit, and that limit was what Shylock could heal. Clearly, Killian had crossed Shylock's line. Furthermore, while Shylock's current appearance was pure Caucasian, his soul was born in the land illuminated by the Red Star. In the underworld of that land, it was an unspoken rule for villains not to suffer harm at the expense of their families. This was especially true for female relatives. Even with a heinous crime of exterminating 9 generations of a family, there had never been a case of killing female relatives in history. The most they could do was to be enslaved for life in the Imperial Music Bureau. Now, even after Killian had clearly signaled to Sherlock that his family wouldn't be harmed, and had 2 Avengers who had participated in the Battle of New York protect Pepper, he still ended up being slapped in the face by Killian's despicable human wave bomb tactics. Sherlock was furious. After all, Killian's abduction of Pepper was a direct slap in the face to Sherlock, the Avengers, and Tony. It's no exaggeration to say it was a double-edged sword, followed by a smack on the face that slammed them all to the ground. Lying in bed, Sherlock grew increasingly furious. Not only did he lose all desire to sleep, but he even felt his sanity being slowly eaten away by the rage within him. After much deliberation, Sherlock simply sat up. Sleep was a futile prospect. He casually exchanged a bottle of a potion from the library, which had nearly taken its toll on him. Sherlock hesitated for a moment, as if he were holding a bottle of strong vodka instead of a magic potion. He exhaled sharply, then closed his eyes and downed the potion. As Sherlock drank the potion, he felt his brain instantly turn cold, the sleepiness he'd felt from not getting enough rest vanishing without a trace. Along with this comforting feeling, something strange happened to Sherlock. Wisps of black smoke began to form around him. After a short while, the smoke tangled together, clinging to him like a substance. This sudden change startled Sherlock, and he quickly checked his entry. Entry, Obscura, entry effect, greatly increases the entry owner's magic power, defense, and affinity for dark magic. Slightly reduces the entry owner's sanity threshold. When the entry owner's sanity reaches 0, the Obscurus will erupt on a large scale, destroying everything that is dangerous to the entry owner. The outbreak lasts for 1 hour. Sanity value: 40 out of 100. Please note that the current entry owner's sanity value is too low due to emotions such as anger. Please pay attention. Entry validity period: 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 0 seconds. After reading the effect of this entry, Sherlock couldn't help but curl up the corners of his mouth. Good man, Killian, even God can't stand this. This is the first time Sherlock has drawn an entry with positive gain. Isn't it obvious that God wants to take Killian away quickly? Well, although this entry has many restrictions, it is undeniable that the gain effect brought by the obscurus is still real. Sherlock has never even felt so powerful. If he had to point to a flaw, it was the fire within him that was growing increasingly restless, even to the point where he'd occasionally flirt with the idea of sabotaging something. Shaking his head, trying to suppress the beast within, Sherlock took a deep breath and opened the door once more. Seeing Sherlock emerge, Rhodes, who had just finished a phone call, and Tony, who was mobilizing his experts, were stunned. Holy crap! How many cigarettes did you smoke in this room to be covered in smoke like this? Confused, Rhodes couldn't contain himself and asked directly when he saw Sherlock shrouded in black smoke. Unsurprisingly, his antics earned him a stern stare from the uncle and nephew across from him. God damn it, smoking in the house? Have you ever seen a good person smoke so much that they're covered in black smoke? Sherlock, tell your uncle honestly, you're not going to spontaneously combust or explode, are you? That Killian stuff is no good, you better not touch it. As if trying to lighten the mood, even though he knew Sherlock's current state was definitely caused by some potion or some kind of magic, Tony still teased Rhodes. Sherlock rolled his eyes even more. After all, Tony's words were so full of flaws that Sherlock didn't know where to begin. Furthermore, Sherlock never expected to hear such a warning in Lighthouse Country, the largest consumer of drugs. It was so heartbreaking. You know, teenagers here smoke like cigarettes. It was just magical. Ignoring the two friends' antics, Sherlock walked over to the computer running fast in the cabin and spoke to it. Jarvis, have you located Killian? As Sherlock finished speaking, Jarvis' voice emanated from the seemingly ordinary laptop. Not yet, Mr. Sherlock. He's being very secretive, and there are powerful computer experts blocking my investigation. I'm currently sifting through the information, so it'll probably take another 15 minutes. Chapter 278 Decisive Battle 2. Listening to Jarvis's report, Sherlock couldn't help but frown, turning to look at Tony standing beside him. Ah, my dear uncle, as the world's wisest man, the renowned Iron Man, the only human cursed by knowledge, yet you couldn't quickly locate that fellow Killian? I truly must admire Killian's ability to conceal his whereabouts. With Sherlock's sarcastic tone and the way he spoke, as if speaking in a translator's voice, Tony's mind was visibly divided, and he kept repeating to himself, my dear nephew, my dear nephew. I can't beat him. I can't beat him. After a long moment, he managed to suppress the urge to hit Sherlock and spoke to him angrily. If only it were as easy as you think. Killian's not stupid. Thanks to his connections with those idiotic politicians, he's managed to weave himself into the Pentagon's defenses. Jarvis has been working flat out for days to find him. He's had to sift through the vast internet for information on Killian's whereabouts, and then find a way to track him down despite being hounded by the Pentagon's cyber experts. You think it's that easy? Sherlock didn't understand a word Tony said. After all, in Sherlock's opinion, Jarvis was the pinnacle of AI. Sherlock couldn't imagine anyone could push Jarvis to this point, well, not counting Ultron. Although Tony spoke with gritted teeth, Sherlock clearly didn't care, even shrugging his shoulders mockingly. Tony felt his blood pressure rising, but he suppressed his temper and, with a forced smile, asked Sherlock to rest and eat. Sherlock readily agreed. He, Tony, and Rod sat at the yacht's bar, each chomping on a burger. Rhodey would periodically reach out and touch the tangible black smoke covering Sherlock's body, like a curious child, wanting to ask something but closing his mouth repeatedly. Just as Rhodey opened his mouth for the 7th time, an alarm suddenly sounded from a nearby laptop, instantly grabbing the three's attention. A map appeared on the screen, a red circle marking the location of a dock. Even Sherlock, who knew nothing, knew it must be a place connected to Killian. Sherlock, Tony hadn't even finished shouting his name when Sherlock erupted in black smoke, piercing the yacht's ceiling like a black meteor and blasting out. Seeing Sherlock's swift departure, Tony and Rod's expressions changed drastically. They no longer cared about eating their burgers, throwing them away. Tony quickly called out to Rod. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Rod, find someone to evacuate the crowd. I'll take the boat, Tony said as he hurriedly rushed to the yacht's wheelhouse. The good news, the port wasn't far from them. The bad news, Sherlock was much faster than them. As the two frantically worried that Sherlock would lose his mind and cause an irreversible accident, Sherlock had already landed at the harbor's berth. Looking at the towering gantry crane in the distance, dangling a colorfully painted war machine, Sherlock sneered. Haha, Killian, you really do enjoy these messy, ritualistic things." After mocking Killian, Sherlock felt like he was back in his own backyard. With a smile on his face, he strode forward, his long legs swinging, toward the massive gantry crane. Meanwhile, Killian, with a sly grin on his face, watched Pepper Potts pinch a rack. That's right, to exact his revenge on Tony, Killian had already begun injecting Pepper Potts with the extremis virus. Just as Killian was about to say something, one of his men quickly approached him and whispered something in his ear. Killian, who had originally looked vindictive, listened to his men's report, glanced at Pepper, who was pinned to the rack, then turned and quickly left with his men. As someone who considered Tony his greatest enemy, Killian naturally investigated the people around him. Sherlock was naturally included in Killian's investigation, but according to Killian's research, Sherlock was likely the owner of an unremarkable underground training ground. Even if her training ground had some capabilities, they were at most using conventional means. To Killian, the ship's laboratory or the information within his own company were not truly important. After all, Killian was a man of immense ambition. He never sought wealth and fame, but rather to be at the top of the pyramid. Now that he was so close to his goal, Killian naturally didn't care about the so-called revenge of that shabby training ground. Once he truly took control of the Lighthouse nation-state machinery, using it against Sherlock's family training ground would be like an adult with a gun attempting to kill a newborn child. It was incredibly simple. But the situation now clearly exceeded Killian's expectations. A common man, who according to his intelligence had received military training, suddenly appeared on his territory, shrouded in black smoke. According to reports, he had flown in, clearly harboring ill intentions. Quickly followed by his men, he appeared on top of the stacked containers. Following Killian's appearance, many of his men, already infected with the extremis virus, also appeared around Sherlock, forming an impenetrable encirclement. Sherlock, naturally aware of this situation, paused, staring at Killian from his perch without a trace of emotion. Killian showed no fear, looking down at Sherlock like a king from above. After a long pause, he spoke. "I never imagined that the person I initially considered the least important, the one with the most casual relationship to that idiot Tony, would be the first to arrive here. What, you amazing kid, are you here seeking revenge for the explosion that destroyed your house?" Killian's tone was frivolous, seemingly unfazed by the dark aura emanating from Sherlock. Killian believed that even with Sherlock's formidable skills, he was no match for as many perfect adapters of the extremis virus. Let alone Sherlock alone, even if he summoned the entire Avengers, Killian believed his extremis virus could outmaneuver the Avengers. Therefore, Killian wasn't overly alarmed by Sherlock's prowess. Hearing Killian's almost arrogant words, Sherlock, who had been calm, suddenly burst into laughter, his laughter growing increasingly manic. After a while, Sherlock finally stopped laughing. With a maniacal smile on his face, he looked up at Killian, who stood high above him, and bowed slightly. "It seems your intelligence work is utterly rubbish, so please introduce yourself." "I'm Sherlock Phoenix, Tony Stark's only blood relative, Iron Man's comrade in arms, a member of the Avengers, the sole possessor of magic in this world, and the creator of the universal potion. Although I've never admitted it, folks have given me a nickname that fits my identity perfectly. I'm sure you've heard of it, the Wizard. The Almighty Wizard, Sanity. 20 out of 100. Chapter 279 Decisive Battle 3. Sherlock, like a crazed noble, gracefully introduced himself, bowing slightly to Killian, who stood aloft. Though Sherlock's movements resembled those of a refined aristocrat, Killian clearly caught a maniacal smile on his face and the scorn in his eyes. Perhaps it was because of Sherlock's relationship with Tony, but seeing Sherlock's sardonic gaze, Killian was transported back to the night he'd waited on the rooftop. Instantly, shame, anger, fear, and other negative emotions flooded Killian's mind. The feeling of his dignity being crushed, thrown to the ground and repeatedly trampled upon, nearly drove him mad. "Kill him, Killian," his eyes reddened, commanded the men surrounding Sherlock below. No matter who this brat was, Killian would never allow his dignity to be trampled upon again like that night. No, Killian had even made up his mind. He would watch this brat being captured alive by his own men, then kneel before him, roasted to a crisp, then ground to dust. Killian's madness naturally couldn't be hidden from Sherlock, who stood below, but Sherlock naturally didn't care. When it came to madness, no one was more experienced than Sherlock. Did Sherlock really believe that he had managed to keep up with Price's military training for 7 years, his magic skills rivaling those of old Dumbledore and others, and even faced the bleak 996 work schedule before his time travel, all by sheer willpower? No, it was the madness of a warlike nation that lies deep within every rabbit. Sherlock's usual cheerful demeanor resembled that of a casual idiot most people encounter, but if you truly angered them, they'd be ready to kill him. 1 or 2 would be a win. If buffs like genealogical temptation and bloodline awakening were added to the mix, the whole world would be terrified by the sheer madness. So, facing Killian's men, grinning toward him, Sherlock wasn't the least bit flustered. He even felt a faint sense of anticipation. With a flick of his wrist, the wand he'd worn during the Battle of New York appeared in Sherlock's hand. With the wand's appearance, Sherlock's clothes billowed. In a split second, he was dressed in the gentlemanly uniform he'd worn during the Battle of New York. Combined with the lingering black smoke around Sherlock and the maniacal expression on his face, it held a strangely intimidating power. While Sherlock's words clearly proved he wasn't just empty talk, Killian's men were, after all, die-hard fans. While some were a bit taken aback by Sherlock's costume change, others remained confident in the extraneous virus within their bodies. This was the situation with the man closest to Sherlock. As Sherlock began to change his clothes, the burly man, radiating the distinctive red glow of the extraneous virus, swung his fist at Sherlock. The temperature around him soared the moment the man began to use his extraneous virus. However, this seemed to have no effect on Sherlock. Facing the incoming fist, Sherlock simply raised a finger. A hint of disdain crossed the man's face at Sherlock's raised finger. He considered his extraneous virus a power akin to divine might. Even the most mysterious and powerful wizard in the world of revenge couldn't withstand the heat of the sun. With a fiery fist, hot enough to melt steel, it collided fiercely with Sherlock's outstretched index finger. The moment the two made contact, the scene everyone imagined of Sherlock's fingers snapping and him flying backwards didn't happen. Sherlock remained standing with a maniacal smile on his face, while the swung fist's expression drastically changed at the moment of contact, his entire body frozen in place as if under a spell. Before anyone could comprehend what had happened, the next second, the once murderous man, before everyone's gaze, instantly transformed into a field of cherry blossom petals. A gentle breeze blew, and the pink petals fluttered in all directions, a breathtaking sight. However, such a beautiful scene was as terrifying as a surging wave in the hearts of those besieging Sherlock. Almost subconsciously, they distanced themselves from Sherlock, gathering their breaths and staring warily at him as he remained standing. Ah, beautiful, isn't it? But it seems you don't enjoy this kind of scene. I won't make things difficult for you. Since you enjoy playing with fire so much, and always resorting to self-immolation, why don't I play with you for a bit? As Sherlock's frantic voice fell, a blazing fire instantly erupted from Sherlock's wand, and the dark blue flames instantly enveloped everyone present. The flames surged, and waves of heat surged in all directions, even more powerful. Unlike the restrictive Grindelwald gas stove used on the New York battlefield, this time Sherlock didn't even place any limits on the dark blue flames of death. As if sensing Sherlock's inner rage, the dark blue flames leaped with excitement, accompanied by the screams within, obeying Sherlock's will to consume everything in their path. In just a few breaths, the screams within the flames faded without a trace, and the battlefield was as quiet as a pin drop, save for the blazing dark blue flames. Illuminated by the blue glow of the flames, Killian, standing high above, had a face as dark as the bottom of a pot, staring intently at the blazing inferno below. Snap! 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 The sudden sound of heels hitting the ground was uncanny, a striking contrast to the already audible sound of a pin drop. As the footsteps grew louder, Sherlock, grinning wildly, slowly emerged from the azure flames. Against the backdrop of the flames, Sherlock looked like a demon from hell, a terrifying presence. Looking up at Killian, whose face was ashen, Sherlock's expression deepened, and a wide smile formed at the corners of his mouth as he spoke to Killian above. Don't even think about running away. This game has reached a point of no return, Sherlock said as he snapped his fingers. Instantly, as if receiving a command, the raging flames behind Sherlock began to spread rapidly. In less than a breath, a wall of fire engulfed the entire battlefield. Killian, standing high above, lost his initial confidence. He gritted his teeth and stared at Sherlock below, seemingly contemplating a countermeasure. Sanity. 10 out of 100. Chapter 280 Decisive Battle 4. Looking down at Sherlock, standing before the dark blue wall of flames, coupled with his grotesquely maniacal smile, Killian felt goosebumps rising. Just look at that guy wearing the most gentlemanly clothes, yet sporting the most twisted smile. Combined with the flames behind him and the black energy that emanated, seemingly tangled, it gave him the impression of evil, chaos, madness, and gloom. All sorts of negative emotions washed over him. It even brought to mind the childhood nightmare of every child in Lighthouse Country, the Joker. Indeed, beyond his appearance and makeup, Sherlock now gave Killian the impression of a clown straight out of a comic book. Furthermore, this clown was even more terrifying than the comic book Joker, who didn't have those magical yet devastating tricks. For a man as insane and arrogant as he was, this was the first time in his life that Killian felt a genuine sense of fear. However, the next moment, Killian realized he was actually afraid of Sherlock. His fear instantly transformed into a deep sense of shame, and then into boundless rage. He considered himself a genius on par with Tony, mastering the extremis virus, a weapon far superior to Iron Man's armor. Now, he was actually afraid of a madman with some magic tricks? Killian couldn't believe it himself. Similarly, Killian couldn't believe anyone could resist his human wave suicide tactic. This tactic was practically invincible, and even the Avengers had suffered numerous setbacks from it. Trying hard to suppress the turmoil in his heart, Killian winked at the two people behind him. They immediately nodded in understanding and turned away. Seeing his close subordinates leave, Killian turned to look at Sherlock, who had been standing below. Sherlock had seen Killian's whirling expression and gnashing of teeth clearly. The Obscurus's blessing on Sherlock wasn't just magical. Sherlock even saw Killian's subtle winks to his men. But Sherlock said nothing. With his maniacal smile and contemptuous eyes, he stood calmly watching Killian's performance, not even bothering to move. I admit, your miraculous tricks amazed me. But my extremis virus is more than just what those idiots display. You're Sherlock, right? Are you ready for your judgment? Killian's fury intensified as he watched Sherlock's stillness. But he also felt confident in his extremis virus. After all, self-destruction and direct attack with the extremis virus were two completely different things. The latest extremis virus could even generate heat equivalent to the surface of the sun in the instant of a human body's detonation. At such a high temperature, nothing could withstand it without being vaporized. Even if it really existed, even if Sherlock's magic was amazing. If he could withstand one such attack, could he withstand 10, or even 100? Killian didn't believe it. In Killian's worldview, if Sherlock truly possessed such power, he would have long since sat on the throne of the world, and wouldn't have needed to cower in a small training ground to compromise. Faced with Killian's arrogant words, Sherlock didn't even say anything, but the look in his eyes grew even more mocking, like a nimble kitten playing with its prey, about to die. He even bowed slightly to Killian, who stood on high, and gestured for him to come. If you ignored the mad and mocking expression on Sherlock's face, no one would find fault with him. But when combined with the look on his face, it gave off a feeling of provocation and contempt. With a cold snort, Killian felt his anger grow stronger, and he stomped his foot hard on the container beneath him. With the sound of shoe heels hitting steel, the doors of a row of containers not far in front of Sherlock suddenly opened. Inside, a large number of people stood densely packed, each with their heads bowed and shoulders slumped, as if they had fallen asleep standing. Looking at the densely packed crowds in the several containers before him, Sherlock narrowed his eyes slightly, as if he had imagined what Killian was going to do, and his eyes suddenly turned colder. A human wave bomb tactic? Poor Mr. Killian, there's a question I've wanted to ask you for a long time. What do you value in life? Sherlock's eyes were fixed on Killian, who stood high above him. Although his tone was still frantic, his words gave off a chilling feeling. Killian was stunned by Sherlock's question, then burst into laughter. He had never imagined that someone who looked even more deranged and evil than himself would ask him a question only righteous characters in cartoons could ask. This is just a small sacrifice before the arrival of the new world. Now, accept your fate. Kill him. Killian laughed for a moment, then his expression gradually turned cold. He stomped hard on the container under his feet and commanded the group of people who seemed to be asleep inside. As Killian issued the order, the people who had seemed to be asleep suddenly raised their heads, staring intently at Sherlock standing nearby. Red lights flashed from those who raised their heads, illuminating the faces of the densely packed crowd inside the container. There were men and women, Old and young, black, white, and yellow-skinned people, people of all ages and races, fat and thin, all kinds of people in the container. The dense crowd was packed with people, yet everyone shared the same state, their eyes devoid of life. Their perfectly synchronized movements, coupled with their vacant, blank stares, made them look more like creatures found only in movies and novels than humans, zombies. Even Sherlock couldn't help but sigh at the dense mass of heads crammed into the shipping containers before him. "Killian, what sin have you committed?" Hearing Sherlock's sigh, Killian sneered, as if the order he had just given to an object wasn't for human death. "Enjoy your last fireworks. Remember, they're a gift from me for your dear uncle." With that, Killian lost interest in watching and turned to leave. He knew his human wave bomb tactics were unbeatable. But before he could take a few steps, he was stopped in his tracks by the exclamation of another of his men. Turning to look down, he saw a scene he would never forget. Sanity value. 7 out of 100. Chapter 281 Decisive Battle 5. Turning killing into art. Killian initially disbelieved this statement, believing it to be nothing more than the rhetoric of idle artists or justification for their crimes by psychopathic murderers. But the scene before him confirmed its truth. As soon as Killian said to Sherlock, "Enjoy your last fireworks," as if on command, the red glow emanating from the people inside the container intensified. The moment Killian turned, the entire occupant, roaring as if on command, charged towards Sherlock. Facing a scene reminiscent of a zombie siege, Sherlock remained unfazed. After all, his magic was no match for these mindless, zombie-like suicide bombers. It's no exaggeration to say that if Sherlock wanted to, even the thought of them getting close to him would be wishful thinking. But for some reason, perhaps due to the influence of the obscurus, or perhaps the rage within Sherlock gradually consuming his sanity, Sherlock chose not those seemingly peaceful measures. Instead, he opted for the most bloody, violent, and frenzied tactic. Shadowless blades, combined with shattering and slicing spells, flew from Sherlock's wand. Like a conductor, Sherlock orchestrated a waltz of death. With each wave of his wand, vast swathes of people were shattered, torn apart, or reduced to limbs. Blood, severed limbs, and flying ashes recurred across the field, echoing Sherlock's graceful, orchestral conducting movements and a strange, maniacal smile. In that moment, Sherlock seemed to have completely transformed into a messenger from hell. Each wave of his wand seemed not to be a small wooden staff, but rather the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Easily and joyfully, he harvested the fruits of life. That's right, it was pleasure. For some reason, this inhumane scene, this hellish scene, stirred within Sherlock not disgust or fear, but a feeling of delight. It was like a long-awaited rain, like a golden entrance exam. Sherlock didn't even notice his own abnormality, and gradually, he began to lose himself in the euphoria. Corpses slowly piled up, blood splattering the ground, creating a beautiful yet eerie scene. Amidst a pile of mangled limbs, a gentleman with a strange, maniacal smile, seemingly enjoying himself conducting the waltz of death. This scene was deeply engraved in the eyes of Killian and his other subordinate, and a fear born of the instinctive survival of all creatures surged through them. This wasn't simple fear, but the dread of facing a natural enemy, like a centipede meeting a rooster, an antelope meeting a lion. This was the fear that only arises in the human blood when facing a superior foe. For the first time, Killian felt a wave of regret. He regretted provoking such a madman. But regret aside, as a powerful figure, despite his regret and fear, Killian still had to consider his next move. After all, in the current situation, negotiations or escape were no longer feasible. Killian lacked the courage to challenge that eerie blue flame. Could his extremis virus withstand it? Similarly, Killian wasn't the only one feeling deep-seated fear. Tony and Rhodes, lurking in the shadows, also knew Sherlock best. Therefore, upon witnessing this hellish scene, Tony felt a sense of dread, as if facing a natural enemy. But even more than that, he was worried about Sherlock. Sherlock wasn't in the right state. And not only was he wrong, he was terribly wrong. Tony thought he knew Sherlock well. He might be lazy and apathetic, but he definitely wasn't a bloodthirsty person. He even possessed a rationality that stood out from the crowd. The scene below was like the arrival of a demon. Under normal circumstances, the Sherlock Tony knew would have stood up and objected. "Tony, are you sure that demon down there is your nephew?" Faced with this hellish scene, resembling a sure field, even the battle-hardened Rhodes couldn't help but swallow hard. This was his first time witnessing such a carnage, a waltz of death, a work of art. Hearing Rhodes' question, Tony's brow furrowed. He wanted to say something, but ultimately chose not to explain. He turned to Rhodes beside him and said, "We have to hurry. Sherlock's not okay. Very wrong. Rhodes, let's split up. You go rescue the president and reactivate the War Machine armor, and I'll rescue Pepper Potts. After everything's done, you take Pepper Potts and leave first. I'll go get that brat back." After hearing Tony's plan, Rhodes hesitated. He glanced at the ongoing slaughter below, then at Tony, whose brows were knitted together, and asked worriedly, "Are you sure? Can you pull that kid back?" Tony's face darkened after hearing Rod's words. He looked at his friend solemnly, then sighed and patted Rod on the shoulder. "Rod, that's the only family I have left in the world. Even if it means death, I won't let that brat end up like that. Go, take care of Pepper for me. I'll be fine." With that, Tony took the lead, crouching down and heading towards the stacked containers. Watching Tony leave, Rod stretched out his hand, wanting to say something, but ultimately, no words came out. He glanced at Sherlock, who was engaged in a murderous waltz below, sighed helplessly, and then stood up and walked towards the suspended president. Just as Tony had said, this kid needed someone to pull him back, and that person had to be someone he knew well. Tony was the best choice at the moment. And me, haha, if I appeared in front of this kid, I would probably be torn apart into pieces like those mindless suicide bombers in the next second. Moreover, as Tony's friend, Rhodes felt that he should do as Tony said and take good care of Pepper, so that Tony would have no worries. Sanity value. 5 out of 100. Chapter 282 Decisive Battle 6. The Bloodbath, a scene reminiscent of a volcanic hell, lasted a full 5 minutes. Sherlock, not even a speck of dust on his clothes, gracefully swung his wand, cleaving the last person who rushed towards him vertically in half. As the bodies clattered to the ground, Sherlock gracefully shook off the non-existent dust and, before Killian's eyes, performed Azen's signature gel-like movements to smooth his hair. He looked at Killian, whose face was livid, like a gentleman from the European nobility, and said with a smile, "Well, dear Mr. Killian, I have received the appetizer you prepared. It is delicious. So, when will your main course be served?" The more Sherlock spoke, the more frantic his smile grew, as if he were genuinely anticipating something. Killian looked down at the scattered limbs and arms below, where blood had even pooled in a small pool. The thick stench of blood rose in waves, and even the dark aura around Sherlock turned a dark red. He swallowed hard. As if noticing Killian's movements, Sherlock seemed suddenly awakened. He gazed at the hellish surroundings before bowing slightly and continuing. "Oh, I'm so rude. How could I allow you to set foot on this messy table with such a delicious and exquisite main course as yours?" Sherlock snapped his fingers with his free left hand. As Sherlock moved, the wall of dark blue flames, as if receiving a command, emanated a tongue of fire behind him. The flame twisted in midair, transforming into a true serpent of flame. While merely dark blue, the remarkable thing was that every detail was intact. The moment the fire serpent appeared, it seemed to understand its purpose. It quickly opened its maw and began to devour the limbs and broken arms on the field. In a matter of breaths, the hellish scene vanished without a trace, even the small pool of blood on the ground vanished completely. If it weren't for the pungent smell of blood still lingering on the battlefield, no one would have guessed the bloodbath that had just taken place. Having accomplished its mission, the giant fire snake swiftly and intelligently crawled to Sherlock's side. Like a dog awaiting praise, it straightened up and looked at Sherlock expectantly. Sherlock lived up to expectations, a smile on his face, even reaching out to pat the fire snake's head in encouragement. Remember, that was a flame of unfathomable heat. While it might look like a giant snake, it was, after all, a flame capable of annihilating a corpse in an instant. Killian's brows furrowed as he watched. He glanced at the surrounding area, enveloped in a dark blue flame, then at the only remaining subordinate behind him who had been injected with the extremis virus. He nodded helplessly to the subordinate behind him. Seeing Killian's actions, the subordinate immediately panicked, looking anxiously at the man he once revered as a god. "Sir, the enhanced extremis virus hasn't been tested yet. Let me do it for you." Killian simply shook his head calmly at his younger brother's suggestion, his face gradually turning frantic as he ordered him. "Go, kill Tony's woman and that piece of shit that fell into the armor. Even if I, Killian, die, I'll make that bastard Tony regret it forever." At this point, Killian suddenly smiled, turning to Sherlock, who remained calm below, and spoke calmly. "What's more, using my death to corrupt his only relative in this world. In exchange for an absolutely insane, absolutely chaotic, and absolutely powerful enemy for Tony, this deal is a lucrative one, isn't it? Killian's expression grew increasingly frantic. After hearing Killian's words, the younger brother no longer hesitated and handed over the box he had been holding. Killian opened the box, revealing 6 syringes of the so-called enhanced extremis virus quietly placed inside. Killian didn't care. He roughly grabbed all the syringes from the box and placed 3 of them directly on his neck. As the drug was injected into Killian's body, an indescribable heat instantly spread across the battlefield. After the injection, Killian's entire body seemed to have transformed into a human sun, radiating a scorching light. Small flames, like sundials, continuously rose from Killian's body. As Killian's body temperature gradually increased, the container finally couldn't withstand the heat. In an instant, it turned into liquid, and Killian fell into the container at his feet. Seeing Killian, the protagonist of the incident, fall, the younger brother cast a resentful look at Sherlock, who stood calmly in his place, and then looked deeply at the empty hole where Killian fell. Finally, he gritted his teeth and turned away. Sherlock seemed unfazed by Killian's disappearance, remaining gracefully in his position, his gaze fixed on the spot ahead, where Killian had fallen. Moments later, Sherlock saw the door on the other side of the open, dark container begin to glow red, then gradually grow brighter and brighter, finally transforming into golden liquid that dripped down bit by bit. Killian, too, slowly emerged from the molten void. Killian's body was now so hot he couldn't even touch the steel, his mere proximity was enough to instantly transform it into molten iron. Killian had never felt so powerful before, as if he had truly become a sun. Although he knew his strength was earned through the massive injections of extremis virus he'd been given, it was enough. Whether it was killing Sherlock or dragging him down with him, Killian felt completely at a loss. Step by step, amidst the scorching heat, Killian arrived at the battlefield, stopping just a few meters from Sherlock. A confident smile returned to his face as he looked at Sherlock, who still stood across from him. "All right, are you ready to face the sun's judgment, Sanity?" 3/100. Chapter 283 Decisive Battle 7. The sun? The first thing that popped into Sherlock's mind was the man in golden armor, whose power grew stronger the closer he got to noon. Compared to that man, how dare Killian call himself the sun? The more Sherlock thought about it, the more ironic it became. He couldn't help but burst into laughter, his laughter becoming increasingly frantic and chaotic. After a while, he barely managed to stop laughing, but the madness on his face only deepened. The sun? Just you? Just you, a player who plays with life so wantonly, dares to call yourself the merciful sun in front of me? Sherlock's words were completely unkind, and the disdain in his eyes was barely concealed. After all, Killian had been using every possible means up to this point, but Sherlock hadn't moved a foot the entire time. Killian didn't seem to care much about Sherlock's taunts. He didn't explain much, instead contemplating how to launch an effective attack on Sherlock. Sherlock was a bit surprised to see Killian didn't go mad at his words. In fact, Sherlock had already prepared his magic against Killian, now all he had to do was wait for him to take the bait. Killian, seemingly unfazed by Sherlock's taunts, remained confident in his current state after a brief self-examination. He hadn't yet fully activated the extremis virus within his body. His body temperature was already approaching 4,000 degrees Celsius. If he truly activated the extremis virus, it could easily reach the temperature of the sun's surface. Even at the very least, even the sun's surface wouldn't be enough to harm this man with miraculous abilities. Killian remained unfazed. He estimated that if he truly became overwhelmed and reached the critical point of his ability to withstand the extremis virus, if he self-destructed in his current state, the temperature would even reach the center of the sun, a staggering 22 million degrees Celsius. Such a terrifying temperature would be comparable to a nuclear bomb detonating in New York City. Even if the kid before him was mad as a madman, he wouldn't disregard the lives of innocent people. And his real trump card wasn't just the high temperature. Killian's surface temperature was approaching 4,000 degrees Celsius. In fact, his entire body, catalyzed by the extremis virus, had been transformed into a plasma-like state. In the One Piece universe, this state was known by a familiar name, elementalization. Therefore, even Sherlock's strange cutting magic wasn't a problem for Killian. After all, no matter how sharp a knife was, it couldn't cut through fire or water, right? Thinking of this, Killian grew more confident. He looked at Sherlock as if he were a piece of meat on a board, and confidently stepped towards him. He intended to gradually destroy Sherlock's confidence, completely corrupting this little guy and turning him into Tony's most formidable opponent. Even if the extraneous virus consumed him completely and he met his own demise, Tony would still regret it and suffer a lot of headaches. Nothing could be more satisfying than revenge, like turning the person Tony once loved into his enemy, right? Killian wore a confident smile, but after just 2 steps, it froze. The reason was simple: he found himself unable to move. To be more precise, aside from Killian's thoughts, everything else seemed to have been paused, beyond his control. Even though Killian himself was a living, luminous source of light, he could see no light. Only pitch blackness. Before he could comprehend what was happening, he heard a burst of maniacal laughter and mocking applause from the other side. Brilliant. Bravo. Truly magnificent, great Mr. Killian. Do you really think I'm just some clueless, reckless youngster? No, I'm quite astute. I've already laid the bait for you, cunning fish, and was just figuring out how to hook you. Who knew you'd actually take the bait? Oh, you didn't really think I was mocking you by not moving in the face of your massive attack? No. Mr. Killian, I'm not that foolish. I'm simply using the blood and limbs of those poor creatures to complete my magic. As Sherlock finished speaking, Killian was astonished to discover he could see again. Sherlock, standing less than a fist's length away, gazed at him with a maniacal grin. Unfortunately, while Killian could see, it was only sight. Beyond his thoughts and vision, everything else remained as if paused. Sherlock, on the other side, seemed to have sensed Killian's doubts. His expression grew increasingly frantic as he continued. It seems that Mr. Killian still doesn't understand what happened. It doesn't matter. This belongs to the field of magic. It doesn't matter if Mr. Killian, who is in the field of science, doesn't understand. But you told me to be soft-hearted. Since Mr. Killian has doubts, I can't let Mr. Killian go to hell with doubts, right? As Sherlock spoke, he began to circle around Killian, looking like a real villain, and continued to speak as he walked. You know, a lot of black magic is actually more powerful and magical than normal magic, but the reason it is called black magic is that either this magic will cause irreparable injuries, or this magic will harm the harmony of nature, and it really goes against the moral concepts of the human race. And I happen to know such a magic, soul confinement. The original intention of this magic was to be used for interrogation. It can confine all conceptual things except time and thinking within a certain range, including temperature, humidity, energy and other messy concepts. All definitions can be sealed or unlocked according to the user's wishes. How about it? Isn't it powerful? Why is this magic classified as black magic? The reason is very simple, because the formation of this magic requires the sacrifice of the flesh and soul of a fixed biological race. But you also know that in the ancient times when people ate each other, the so-called flesh and soul were nothing more than a few sinners and slaves to the magicians, so no one cared. Sanity value 2/100. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284 Decisive Battle 8. As Sherlock spoke, he gently traced a finger across Killian's outstretched arm, causing Killian's pupils to shrink sharply. Fact proved Sherlock's words were true. After all, Killian's body was still glowing red, a sign of a scorching temperature of around 4,000 degrees Celsius, yet Sherlock had no qualms about running his finger across that 4,000-degree heat without a trace of discomfort. It was as if he hadn't touched a hot object, but an ordinary arm. As if noticing Killian's look, Sherlock smiled softly, lowered his finger, and continued walking away from Killian, his back facing him. Time continues to evolve, and so does magic. It wasn't until the last century that a dark magic genius named Tom Riddle discovered a new use for this magic. It was still the same magic, but Tom unexpectedly discovered that it could aid him in a highly inhumane blood fusion. Simply put, this blood fusion magic involves stripping the abilities of a powerful species, then, after anchoring himself, painlessly integrating them. He succeeded. He became a creature neither human nor ghost, but no one could deny his power. Isn't it amazing? Doesn't it look familiar? Doesn't it resemble the little fireman you became today with the help of the so-called extremist virus? But unfortunately, he failed. Powers not your own always have side effects, and the side effect of blood fusion was that he became as brutal, cold, and unsympathetic as an animal. Like you, he began to treat human life as a living toy. Sherlock spoke as he slowly approached Killian, slowly placing his left hand on his chest before continuing. Luckily, I've read a few of his research journals, and I know what he says I know. Unfortunately, because this magic is so inhumane, I've never tried it myself. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to practice it. The more Sherlock spoke, the more uneasy Killian grew. Especially after Sherlock finished speaking, his gaze fixed, and he grasped the hand on Killian's chest with a fierce grip. With a swipe, he forcibly pulled a golden, star-studded figure from Killian's body. The moment Sherlock pulled the figure free, Killian felt an indescribable pain, as if Sherlock had torn a piece of his body from every cell. The immense pain washed over Killian's brain like a tidal wave, wave after wave. For a moment, Killian even considered death a far better option than his current situation. No, even if it weren't death, merely being unconscious would have been enough for Killian to be thankful for. But Alice, due to Sherlock's magic, neither coma nor death was a possibility for Killian. After extracting the figure, Sherlock aimed his wand at it without hesitation. It was unknown what magic Sherlock used, but the figure, composed of countless golden dots, continued to compress under Sherlock's spell. Despite the figure's screams and struggles to escape, it was ultimately unable to escape Sherlock's clutches. Ultimately, it was compressed into a small golden ball, which Sherlock quickly placed in a flask. After finally recovering from the soul-wrenching pain, Killian, having been extracted, discovered that no trace of the extremist virus remained on his body. He was like an ordinary person, pinned to a spot by Sherlock, unable to move. Meanwhile, Sherlock seemed to have discovered something interesting, constantly observing the golden sphere in a flask like a curious child. However, the moment he spoke, Killian was terrified. So this is what the extremist virus really looks like? Haha, honestly, it's quite pretty. After observing it for a moment, Sherlock casually tossed it into his library. Turning to look at Killian, who was still fixed in place, the smile on Sherlock's face gradually twisted. How is it? It doesn't feel good to have things extracted from your body alive? Killian, to be honest, you shouldn't have messed with me. No, I should say you shouldn't have trampled on my bottom line. I can accept people around me taking risks, or even getting hurt. But I absolutely cannot accept people around me being injured, killed, or disabled because of other people. It's a pity, Killian, you're dancing back and forth on my bottom line perfectly. You know, I swore in front of someone that I would make you experience the most painful death. As a waste. A death that is thousands of times more painful than the desperate virus that was just extracted from your body. The more Sherlock spoke, the more distorted his expression became. About 2 meters away from Killian, Sherlock raised his wand with a ferocious look on his face. The wand pointed at Killian, and the expression on Sherlock's face became more and more crazy. He gently uttered the spell that he once avoided. Crucio, as the spell uttered, a flash of crimson lightning shot out from Sherlock's wand, instantly striking Killian, who was helpless. The next moment, Killian's previously imprisoned body was suddenly freed, but with it came an unending wave of agony. Killian felt as if his soul had been thrown into a meat grinder, the agony piercing his soul causing every cell to wail. However, due to the body's protective mechanisms, even a groan or a breath couldn't be uttered in the face of such intense pain. Just as Killian's face flushed crimson with pain and suffocation, Sherlock suddenly ceased his magic, smiling from a distance as he watched Killian gasp for air like a drowning man struggling to reach shore. An indescribable joy crept over Sherlock, accompanied by a maniacal grin that made him look like a demon from hell. Killian was truly terrified this time. He would rather die than experience such agony a second time. After regaining some strength, Killian was about to end his life with the ground when another bolt of red lightning struck him. Along with the lightning came Sherlock's demonic whisper. No, 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 Killian, here, even if you wish to die, I can drag you out of hell. Without my consent, not even the Grim Reaper can take your life. I've said, you will die piece by piece, in endless pain. Sherlock didn't even notice the joy in his tone as he spoke these words, the deranged expression on his face. Similarly, Sherlock didn't notice that his sanity bar had dropped to just 1. As the unforgivable curse appeared, The black mist surrounding Sherlock began to gather and thicken, gradually enveloping his entire body. Just as Sherlock was about to lose himself in the joy and power of the black magic, a man in iron armor descended from the sky and landed beside Sherlock. He gently placed his hand on Sherlock's shoulder and said softly, "That's enough, Sherlock. Leave the rest to your uncle. You've done more than enough." Chapter 285 Decisive Battle 9. Enough? Who said enough? Antonia's arm is gone. I haven't even given Killian the most painful death yet, and that's enough? Sherlock was a bit overwhelmed, and dazed. He turned back in the direction of the voice. Tony, now dressed in a classic gold and red battle armor, his visor open, looked at Sherlock with a kind expression, as if awaiting his response. Seeing Tony's face, Sherlock regained his composure, the chaotic emotions in his head finally seeming to loosen. But before Sherlock could say anything, Killian, who had finally recovered, didn't want to let Sherlock and Tony go. He lay on the ground and burst into laughter. Killian's laughter immediately drew Sherlock's attention back to the battlefield, and the little connection he had forged between him and Tony, built through family affection, vanished in an instant. "Ho ho 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 ho, that brat over there named Sherlock, don't be so naive. Leave it to him. If he really wanted to leave it to him, he wouldn't be showing up in front of you wearing that tin can. Look up carefully. This is both to deal with me and to warn you. Your uncle doesn't love you as much as you think." Ha 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 ha. As Killian finished speaking, Sherlock almost subconsciously looked up at the sky. Above, he saw neatly arranged steel armor in midair, encircling the entire battlefield. Above, rows of armor formed an encirclement, and below, Sherlock unleashed a blazing blue flame. The entire battlefield was practically encircled. Bullshit. Sherlock, don't listen to Killian. The moment Killian finished speaking, Tony's face changed drastically, and he shouted at Sherlock. But Sherlock was no longer lucid. In that instant, a wave of immense sorrow enveloped him, and the black mist surrounding him began to swirl violently, tinged with red. Thick black mist, mingled with a blood-red aura, swirled around Sherlock like a series of evil spirits, writhing in agony. The aura of madness, darkness, and chaos surrounding Sherlock grew even more intense. If Sherlock had paid closer attention to his own stats, he would have noticed that his sanity value was oscillating wildly between 0 and 1. No one knew if Sherlock would transform into Obscurus and begin his destructive rampage in the next moment. Not even Sherlock himself knew. Seeing Sherlock seemingly on the verge of losing control, Tony, unaware of Sherlock's current state, paled. He immediately closed his visor and soared into the sky. Whatever Sherlock's condition, Tony was certain that this Sherlock was definitely not lucid. Therefore, if he wanted to stop Sherlock, he would have to experiment with an unmanned suit. Intellectually, Tony's actions were perfectly sound. But emotionally, especially for someone like Sherlock, whose emotions almost completely dominated his brain, Tony's actions undoubtedly proved Killian's point. In that instant, boundless rage threatened to consume Sherlock. Beneath the swirling black mist, Sherlock looked like a demon from hell, staring intently at Killian, who still lay on the ground, laughing. "It's not for you, an outsider, to decide what happens to me and my family. Since you wish to die, I'm happy to grant you that," Sherlock practically roared at Killian, the man lying on the ground. Deep disappointment, combined with Killian's laughter, transformed into intense rage. Because of the Obscurus, Sherlock's roar sounded like the cries of countless wronged souls in hell, a chilling feeling. But Killian showed no fear at all. He even felt a faint sense of anticipation. No one noticed that Killian's eyes were filled with joy, as if celebrating the impending success of his plan. No, it should be said that someone noticed the change in Killian's eyes. Tony, flying midair, noticed Killian's look. Fellow genius, Tony almost immediately understood Killian's plan, his expression changing dramatically. He no longer cared about his own safety, quickly descending, while simultaneously calling out to stop Sherlock. No. Sherlock, but Tony was clearly a step too slow. Along with Tony's voice came Sherlock's voice chanting an incantation. Avada. As the incantation began, Sherlock's swan tip began to emit a despairing green light. Against this green glow, Killian's expression, a look of madness and relief, a look of no regrets and death, was revealed. Unfortunately, Sherlock didn't finish the incantation. Halfway through, for some reason, an indescribable palpitation gripped Sherlock's heart. A sense of overwhelming fear instantly wiped out all emotion. At that moment, Sherlock's intuition told him that if he truly cast the spell, the entire world would likely undergo unpredictable changes, and he himself might even lose something. This feeling was incredibly strong, almost undeniable. Before the time travel, Sherlock's intuition was exceptionally sharp, relying on it to often hit the nail on the head. After gaining the supernatural power of magic, Sherlock's trust in his intuition became even stronger. Many wizards' notes stated that, with a blessing of magic, intuition can sometimes save a person's life. With this combined power, his mind, once swamped with emotions, suddenly cleared up. As Sherlock regained his composure, the black mist around him roared incessantly, struggling to be dragged back into Sherlock's body. In just a few breaths, by the time Tony landed, Sherlock had returned to the way he'd been when they'd first met, completely devoid of the demonic presence he'd previously possessed. Tony, who had fallen to the ground, was stunned by the sudden change. The scientific side of Tony had no idea what was happening, but out of concern for Sherlock, Tony, who had landed, hugged Sherlock, who was still stunned, without hesitation. "You're back, you're back. It's good to be back. It's good to be back, yeah, I'm back." Sherlock finally showed the familiar smile Tony had on his face, and out of Tony's sight, he silently put away the half-finished melon in his hand. Chapter 286 Decisive Battle 10. The peaceful scene between Sherlock and Tony seemed to deeply irritate Killian. He couldn't understand what had happened. His plan had seemed so close to success, when suddenly that devilish child regained his composure. "No. No. No. It's not like that. You should kill me. You shouldn't have regained consciousness. No. Come and kill me. Complete your mission," Killian screamed, struggling frantically to his feet. His eyes were filled with resentment and madness as he stared intently at Sherlock and Tony, who stood there. Both Sherlock and Tony frowned at Killian's rant. To Tony, Killian was undoubtedly a madman, a narrow-minded and vindictive player. To Sherlock, he was a jerk who had hurt his friends and family. Both Sherlock and Tony shared a common trait: they hated Killian. Therefore, facing Killian's commanding bark, both Tony and Sherlock felt a sense of annoyance. If Sherlock hadn't extracted the extremis virus from Killian, they might have given him a second glance. But now Killian was just an ordinary person, one with impaired bodily functions, and neither of them could bear to hear Killian's barking any longer. Just as Sherlock was about to wave his wand to silence Killian, something unexpected happened. A small hand, gleaming with the red glow of the extremis virus, with a temperature hot enough to melt steel, instantly pierced Killian's back. The sudden turn of events left Sherlock and Tony stunned, unsure how to react. One of the creators of the extremis virus had perished at its hands. This outcome was undoubtedly ironic for Killian. Even Sherlock, who was filled with rage towards Killian, after his emotional outburst, felt no reaction to his death. The only question that intrigued them was, whose subordinates could be so brutal? Killian himself was equally in disbelief. His roars, his resentment, his ambitions, vanished with the small hand that emerged from his chest, leaving only astonishment. Killian tried to turn around to see who had killed him, but it was clear that his body, overwhelmed by the extremis virus, could not sustain Killian's final wish. Finally, Killian collapsed helplessly, like a rag doll. With Killian's fall, Sherlock and Tony finally saw who had inflicted the reverse Black Tiger Heart Rip attack on Killian. Pepper, Aunt Pepper. Though the names were different, Sherlock and Tony called out the names in unison. After revealing Pepper's identity, they exchanged a bewildered glance. Sherlock read Tony's gaze, a mixture of bewilderment, a touch of fear, and a smattering of worry. Sherlock looked at Tony with a look filled with pity. Given Pepper's current ferocity, Tony's hopes of boosting his marital status were likely just a pipe dream. However, what the two men couldn't have anticipated was that even more brutality was yet to come. Pepper, seemingly utterly resentful of Killian, ignored the bewildered Sherlock and Tony. After Killian collapsed, Pepper, without hesitation, kicked him again. Then, as the two watched in horror, she spat in Killian's face. Ahem. Bah. You son of a bitch, at percent, and percent at percent, as if still unsatisfied, she continued to lash out at Killian's corpse a few more times. This unrepeated barrage of Americana completely shattered Sherlock's image of Pepper as a gentle, powerful woman. What about a gentle, intellectual beauty? What about an elegant, noble, and powerful woman? It was all bullshit. It wasn't pushed to the point. If it was, it would be insane. After a while, Pepper finally seemed to have vented her anger, slurring up Killian's mouth full of saliva, and finally returning to the Pepper she remembered. Pepper, as if she'd just noticed Sherlock and Tony standing nearby, smiled gently at them and even tried to hug Tony. Sherlock silently gave Tony a look that said, "Be on your own, don't piss her off," and silently took a step back. But what Sherlock never expected was that Tony would actually do the same thing. In response to Pepper's request for a hug, Tony, even in his armor, took a step back. Tony was truly brave, Sherlock kept sighing inwardly. Thankfully, Tony was quick to react and immediately explained his actions. "Don't be angry, honey. It's not that I don't want to hug you, it's just that you're so hot right now." Tony was a playboy, after all. The word hot was a double entendre, both flattering Pepper and justifying his own actions. Watching from the side, Sherlock wanted to applaud Tony. "Wow, no wonder I'm single, yet I can still play like this?" Pepper wasn't unreasonable. Glancing down at her still glowing body, she acquiesced to Tony's statement, even feeling a bit pleased. Seeing that Pepper wasn't angry, Tony breathed a sigh of relief and quickly changed the subject. "Why are you here? Didn't I tell that guy Rod to take you away?" Tony had barely finished his words when another figure descended from the sky. It was none other than the colorfully painted War Machine. Rod opened his visor almost the instant he landed, staring at Tony with a resentful look. Tony, as if finding an outlet, unleashed a barrage of rants at Rhodes. "Rhodes, didn't I tell you to take Pepper away first? I came to find Sherlock, and this is how you took Pepper away." It would have been fine if Tony hadn't said anything, but once he finished, Rhodes' expression grew even more resentful. He pointed at a small, blackened handprint on the chest of his armor and complained. "Tony, even though I'm single, could you two please stop stuffing me with dog food?" Chapter 287 Everything is over. Faced with Rhodes's merciless taunts, even Tony, with his thick skin, couldn't help but blush. He quickly changed the subject and began to inquire about what was happening on Rhodes' side. Rhodes, unfazed, began to recount his side of the story. Rhodes' story was, in fact, quite uneventful. While quietly lurking near the president, clad in the War Machine armor, Rhodes spotted one of Killian's men. As a military veteran, Rhodes had no problem with his ambush. After 2 despicable shots, he took down the enemy and rescued the president. Even after reactivating his armor, Rhodes, fearing the extraneous virus had some sort of resurrection armor effect, unleashed a barrage of American-style fire on the unfortunate individual he had ambushed. The sound of gunfire naturally attracted Pepper Potts' attention, who approached Rhodes. Remembering Tony's instructions, Rhodes wanted to take Pepper Potts' president with him. Whether out of frustration or unwilling to abandon Tony, Rhodes had originally planned to evacuate them, one each, but Pepper, using her own extraneous virus, managed to break free. That was when the dark slap mark on his chest was left. So, Rhodes was forced to temporarily get the president to a safe place before returning to Pepper. He probably didn't expect Pepper to sneak up behind Killian and deliver a brutal blow after he left. After Rhodes finished speaking, everyone started to wonder what had happened to Sherlock. After all, Sherlock's behavior just now resembled those villains in picture books, ready to destroy the world at any moment. Sherlock ultimately attributed the concern to his obscurus. He even glanced at the current sanity value, which showed 30 out of 100, still within his control. If Sherlock's guess was correct, the situation had been caused, in part, by the influence of the obscurus's powerful dark magic, and in part by Sherlock's rage, which had reduced his sanity. The combined effect had nearly driven Sherlock out of control. Fortunately, the palpitations and fear from chewing the melon had finally brought Sherlock back to his senses, otherwise, it was hard to say what would have happened. Sherlock, now reeling from his own recent state, was filled with lingering fear, especially after using the unforgivable curse. The almost ecstatic satisfaction and pleasure he felt afterward gave Sherlock goosebumps just thinking about it. It's no wonder that Dumbledore and the Emperor's notes repeatedly warned against using the unforgivable curse, a form of magic that could lead to emotional depravity. With all the misunderstandings resolved, Sherlock untransformed, retracted the Azure Fiend fire, and prepared to call for everyone to evacuate. However, just as Sherlock was about to send everyone packing, Tony announced he had a gift for Pepper Potts, but first, he needed to calm her down. The 3 present almost immediately locked eyes on Sherlock. Sherlock was completely paralyzed. "I really don't know how to do this," Sherlock racked his brains, but couldn't think of any magic that could quickly cool someone down. And don't even mention the freezing spell. That's a control skill that only makes people look frozen, not actually cooling them. Besides, even if it did work, Sherlock wouldn't dare use it. If Sherlock really used a freezing spell on Pepper Potts, turning her into a giant popsicle and falling straight down, not to mention whether the armor would be torn apart by Tony's control. The mere thought of facing his aunt's occasional little revenge gave Sherlock goosebumps. After all, no one else's aunt would turn against Black Tiger and tear his heart out. Finally, after much deliberation, Sherlock suggested using water to cool the temperature. The others, unaware of Sherlock's magical abilities, agreed. Not even Pepper Potts objected. The situation between the four people present became somewhat strange. Rhodes turned his back, his shoulders shaking, as if he were trying to stifle a laugh. Tony closed his visor and used the suit's built-in scanning function to continuously check Pepper's temperature. Sherlock, with a look of despair, raised his wand, the tip of which continuously sprayed small streams of water onto Pepper's head. Pepper, meanwhile, was drenched in the water Sherlock had conjured from the spring, steam rising from her body as she looked expectantly at Tony standing across from her. The more Sherlock looked at his spraying wand, the darker his expression grew. For some reason, the side of his spraying wand reminded him of a blue-haired idiot, a goddess who could only boast of a small fountain at a banquet with a fan. Well, Sherlock could also use the large water ball like spring water he'd used when Dumbledore battled that noseless two-way jack at the Ministry of Magic to quickly cool Pepper down. But then again, if Pepper were really stuffed into that modified, washing machine-like spring, Sherlock himself might not survive much longer. This dramatic scene lasted for a while, and then Sherlock seemed to suddenly react. He suddenly stopped his magic and looked at Tony, who was checking Pepper's temperature, with a strange expression. "I say, are you planning to blow up all those armors in the sky as fireworks to show Auntie that you've overcome your anxiety?" It would have been fine if Sherlock hadn't said it. After he finished speaking, Sherlock clearly saw Tony stiffen, and immediately realized that his suspicion was correct. Damn, Tony, that prodigal son, actually planned to do this. In the original novel, those armors had participated in the battle, suffered a lot of damage, and exploded. But now, every one of them was brand new, and Tony was actually going to blow them up for fun. Whose fireworks cost tens of billions of dollars. Sherlock immediately objected to Tony's idea, saying that such a general waste was absolutely unacceptable, and that his house hadn't been renovated yet. If Tony wanted to blow up the armor, he might as well make use of it and have it come over to help him repair his house. So, after Sherlock made this suggestion, the scene became a bit unsightly. Rhodes stood beside Sherlock, laughing so hard that he could barely stand up, while Sherlock sat on the ground with a look of despair on his face, holding up his wand and shooting magic fireworks into the sky. Not far away from the two of them, Pepper Potts was hugging Tony sweetly. As for the armor in the sky, well, do you see that neatly arranged line in the sky? Those are the armors Tony had built, lining up to fly towards Sherlock's house. Sherlock said something that Pepper Potts agreed with deeply. It would be a waste to blow them up, and they could just make use of the waste to form a steel construction team of the Stark Group. Chapter 288 Post-War Events. The dockside battle between Sherlock and Killian ended quietly, barely registering any notice, as if it were over. Killian's long and desperate plot ultimately resulted in nothing more than a televised message about a Mandarin being executed by the anti-terrorist squad. What remained was a squabbling among the utterly clueless top brass. Politicians who had once stood with Killian and those whom he had threatened, intimidated, and even nearly killed, were now engaged in a vicious, dog-eat-dog struggle, leaving the ground in a state of chaos. As for AIM, the company Killian founded, well, it was a hardship for those poor workers. They might need to find new jobs, but Sherlock said there wasn't much harm in staying away from such a sweatshop. Upon his return, Price began his revenge against AIM. As Price gradually revealed AIM's secrets in the media and online, the company's reputation plummeted. Especially after the inside story of AIM's so-called limb repair project, specifically the side effects of extremis, was revealed, AIM became a pariah. Price capitalized on this wave of hype by releasing footage and logs of human experiments he'd retrieved from the freighter, further fueling the flames. This provided a powerful lesson in both hands for those politicians still vying for a piece of AIM's power. Of course, Pepper Potts, CEO of Stark Enterprises, couldn't miss such a perfect opportunity. She immediately announced she would take over the mess left behind by AIM, providing treatment for those victims of AIM's persecution and completely eliminating the side effects of extremis. This also significantly boosted Stark Enterprises' favorability. Furthermore, thanks to the samples and experimental data Price and his team had brought back from the freighter, the so-called antidote to extremis didn't even require Tony's involvement. The company's R&D staff could reverse engineer the solution. Of course, none of this had much to do with Sherlock. After the battle that night, while Rhodes had to continue his work, Sherlock took both Pepper Potts and Tony back to his training ground. Their mansion had already been reduced to ash, so it was natural for them to stay at their nephew's house. What neither of them expected was that Pepper Potts would fall completely in love with Sherlock's training ground. For her, it offered her the opportunity to manage Stark Enterprises with the tower's technology and receive treatment for the extremis virus. Most importantly, it was crowded and lively. Many of the Black Widows had become close friends with Pepper Potts, sharing everything and even going shopping together. Black Widow and Hawkeye, who had recovered and been discharged from the hospital, also loved the environment at Sherlock's place. The main reason was freedom. To them, everyone at Sherlock's place was a master of extraordinary skills, making them stand out from the crowd. This allowed them to find a long-awaited sense of ease as ordinary people. Tony saw this and thought, what the hell is this? He decided to just use Sherlock's house as the Avengers' gathering place. Everyone, even Sherlock's 5 uncles, ignored Sherlock's opinion and agreed. This meant Sherlock's obscurus was over, otherwise, he would have lost another 20 points in sanity. Now that the decision had been made, Tony wasn't one to waste time. The steel construction team immediately began work. As a wealthy businessman, Tony provided the funds, and Sherlock was forced to provide the space. The training ground's renovation began in earnest. Every day, the training ground was bustling with people, constantly designing their own areas. Black Widow and the other Avengers, without even a hint of politeness, had planned a small house behind Sherlock's training ground for themselves. It was only because Sherlock's land was spacious enough, otherwise, with these people's ideas, Sherlock's house wouldn't have been able to fit everything. Of course, even as the training ground renovation was underway, Sherlock didn't forget his promise to Antonia. Since Antonia lost both arms while protecting Pepper Potts, Tony felt a sense of responsibility and volunteered to join in customizing Antonia's arms. Antonia, naturally, had no objection to Tony's involvement and was even delighted. She happily presented the sketch of her own arm design to the two of them. Sherlock's eyes nearly rolled up when he saw Antonia designing her own arm. I didn't realize you were such a hardcore gamer, just look at the arm Antonia had designed. The mantis blade from Cyberpunk, the wrist blades from Assassin's Creed, you name it, Antonia had stuffed it into her arm. Sherlock's eyebrows twitched. Are you making an arm, or are you customizing some merchandise? Are you really afraid your custom arm will weigh 8 tons? But since he'd already promised, Sherlock was sure to keep his word. As the training ground renovations were in full swing, Sherlock and Tony locked themselves in the tower for a full week. Surprisingly, they managed to create a perfect arm, a perfect fusion of magic and technology. This arm allowed the user to fully experience all the hand's natural senses. They also, according to Antonia's wishes, built it with cyberpunk-style mantis blades and Assassin's Creed-style wrist blades. Sherlock discarded the rest of the clutter, but in the palm of his hand, Tony built a hand cannon from the iron armor, which could also fly short distances with Antonia, powered by 2 small, new reactors. At Antonia's constant pleas, Sherlock reluctantly modified Tony's hand cannon with magic, engraving it with a spell that fixed it to a specific attack spell, Fiery Flame, which could be powered by Tony's micro-reactor. However, due to the energy source, Fiery Flame lost its original power and function, instead transforming into radiation waves similar to the hand of the Crimson Armor in Code Geass, Lelouch of the Rebellion. It can be regarded as a disguised realization of Antonia's idea of using magic. However, Sherlock never expected that Tony, the majestic Iron Man, was also optimistic about this technology, and he even shamelessly showed Sherlock what it meant to steal lessons. This made Sherlock angry and always wanted to find a reason to beat Tony hard. However, as the two experimented, they soon discovered a bug with this powerful function, which required a lot of energy to support it. Taking Antonia's prosthetic arm as an example, one arm can perform up to 2 radiation wave attacks. After the attack is over, Antonia's arm no longer has any energy to activate other attack weapons. If you switch to steel armor with only one energy source, you may only be able to attack once. After one attack, the energy will be consumed. Moreover, such an attack will only take effect when you place your hand close to the target. Otherwise, nothing will happen. Only two medium-sized sparks will appear. If the energy had not been consumed, you might have doubted whether the attack just now was launched. But even so, Antonia still happily expressed that she really likes the prosthetic limb jointly created by Tony and Sherlock. Chapter 289, A New Look at the Training Ground, Part 1. After Sherlock and Tony finished taking care of Antonia's prosthetic limbs, they ended their week-long seclusion and, upon exiting the tower, barely recognized their own training ground. For a moment, they even thought they traveled through time again due to overwork. After all, it had happened before, and Sherlock still remembered his unique way of traveling. Fortunately, Tony was still standing by Sherlock's side, confirming that this was indeed his training ground, and not another time travel. Sherlock's surprise was understandable, as the difference between the current training ground and Sherlock's previous retreat was worlds apart. Thanks to the leadership of Tony, the wealthy businessman, and Pepper, the landlady, and the 24-hour work of the steel engineering team, Sherlock's home had been completely upgraded, starting with a shop at the main entrance, which had collapsed after Killian's suicide bomber. The shop remained the same small two-story structure, now run by the restored Unit 01 and Unit 02, fully equipped with identity scanning and a highly advanced unmanned vending machine. The entire second floor of the shop is no longer used as a living quarters, but has been transformed into a full-fledged ammunition storage facility. After being sorted and stored, various types of ammunition are transported to the shooting range to the left of the shop via a fully automated conveyor belt. The ultimate handler of this ammunition is the absolute centerpiece of the training range, the fire fridge. By placing the fire fridge inside the shooting range, the guns and ammunition are separated, ensuring safety between the shop and the shooting range. The shooting range has also undergone significant changes. First, 3 small doors have been added to the shop, on the left, the center, and the right. The left door leads to the shooting range, which opens into a corridor. Beyond the corridor is the outdoor shooting range, which has been doubled in size. This outdoor range is wide enough to accommodate sniper target practice. Adjacent to the outdoor range is the indoor shooting range known as the Sherlock Family Training Camp Preschool, where the fire fridge is also located. As mentioned earlier, the shop has 3 doors, left, center, and right. The right door isn't much to describe, it's the Black Widow's female training camp, offering a wide range of training for the wealthy women nearby, including body shape and flexibility training. The training programs are diverse, anything related to women can be found here. Even before Killian's time, this place was a favorite haunt for uptown New York's wealthy ladies, especially the wives of the wealthy, who simply couldn't leave. Of particular note is the center door at the back of the gun shop. This door still leads to the training grounds, though now it's remarkably renovated. Because Pepper still drives to get off work, an underground passage has been constructed to the left of Sherlock's gun shop, beneath the passage leading to the shooting range. It circles the gun shop halfway and leads directly to the tower behind the training grounds. Originally, this road wasn't accessible to vehicles, it was just a paved bluestone path, barely passable. After all, they were a bunch of roughnecks from humble beginnings. You couldn't expect Price and his crew to revamp the training ground like our own People's Army, right? The training ground remained the same, only half expanded, allowing Price to use the extra space for more training. Across from this expanded ground, right next to the Black Widow's female training camp, was the large warehouse used for CQB training. This remained unchanged. Even if there had been changes, they would likely have to be reversed. After all, the short stretch of road leading from the Black Widow's training ground to the CQB warehouse was known as the Hormone Road by the wealthy women in the Black Widow training camp. Trainees passing this stretch of road for QCB training were inevitably whistled at and harassed by the female hooligans. The trainees were all young men, inevitably blushing at the teasing of these frivolous, wealthy women. There were complaints from some students, but Price believed that just a few words of teasing could cause them to lose their balance, significantly diminishing their CQB training. So, if they were actually on the battlefield and the enemy used a honey trap, what would they do? Would they even fight? So, they just let it happen. But it was no wonder those wealthy women couldn't control themselves. Only those seasoned men like John Micron could enter the CQB training grounds, or those who had completed basic training there. Each of them, suited up and armed, truly exuded the majesty of battle. Their iron-blooded passions determined the outcome. Their testosterone was surging, and even Sherlock, not to mention the wealthy women, would have to exclaim, "How handsome!" Putting aside these minor changes, what truly made Sherlock feel like he'd traveled through time was the transformation surrounding the tower itself. It was truly a constant transformation. First, to the right of the tower, behind the CQB warehouse, a number of townhouses had been built. These served as accommodations for the Black Widows. Those who disliked living in the tower could move in. On the other side, to the left, a super community had been built, featuring identical townhouses. A single room, 2 people, could practically accommodate all the Avengers. In the center of this Avengers community, there was a common area, a pool, a kitchen, and sun loungers, reminiscent of a resort in the Maldives. Each Avengers room was unique, decorated entirely to their specific circumstances and preferences. For example, Hawkeye's house, with his wife and children, was slightly larger, boasting 4 bedrooms and 2 living rooms. Singles like Sherlock had 2 bedrooms and 1 living room. Even Sherlock's uncles are like this, though compared to the Avengers, they live much closer. After all, these 5 are close buddies who've been through thick and thin together, and all of them are veterans of the military. They don't care about privacy, which is what Sherlock's uncles requested. While they live a little closer together, and their 5 houses are connected, they're still part of the community, so Pepper Potts won't exclude them. And honestly, if you really consider the skills of Sherlock's 5 uncles, they could easily join the Avengers. After all, they're capable of competing against Black Widow and Hawkeye. Pepper Potts has seen them sparring together more than once. She even offered Sherlock's 2 little girls a place, but considering their age, she ultimately arranged for them to live together, close to Sherlock and his 5 uncles. Of course, since all the Avengers were given houses, there was no need to favor one over the other. Pepper also built a lot of empty houses for future Captain America, Falcon, Hulk, and the others. Anyway, the space was big enough, and the materials wouldn't cost much, right? Chapter 290, A New Look at the Training Ground, Part 2. Of course, as the financial backers, Pepper and Tony's house is naturally the largest and most luxurious in the entire community. Even Sherlock wouldn't have a problem with this, after all, they're the ones paying for it, right? It's worth noting that, with Tony away, Pepper took charge of the entire design and construction, finally fulfilling something she'd wanted to do since they met. That is, there's absolutely no room for Tony to transform the garage or even a room into a studio. Pepper says she's tired of coming home from get-off work to find Tony's creative mess, even requiring a construction crew to come in and do some repairs. A home is a warm place to live. Therefore, while Pepper and Tony's house is the largest, most of it is dedicated to living and entertaining. To eliminate the typical garage and studio mentality, Pepper didn't even include a garage when designing this community. This begs the question, if Tony, Marvel's foremost craft blogger, doesn't have a studio at home, where does he design and build his Iron Man suit? The answer is simple. Considering this place might potentially become an Avengers base in the future, Pepper Potts thoughtfully designed a massive hangar behind the community for convenience. Just how big is this hangar? Sherlock feels like if he hadn't been told it was a hangar, he might have mistaken it for a shipyard or a warehouse for storing airships. It's incredibly large, almost as big as half the size of Black Widow's women's training ground. And because it's so large, Pepper Potts has relocated not only Tony's workshop, but also the workshops of many Avengers and 141st. Next to the hangar is a massive factory and warehouse complex, half the size of the hangar itself. If Tony is designing a suit, the materials in the warehouse and the factory machinery can produce a massive army in a short period of time. Even weapons and equipment needed by others can be quickly produced by simply inputting parameters and other miscellaneous items into the factory. Although the hangar was now completely empty, without even a single plane, Pepper Potts had built a runway on the other side of the hangar. The other side between the runway and the hangar housed the student dormitories. Of course, the dormitories were nothing like the Avengers community, most of them consisted of apartments within a building. While the dormitories had direct access to the training grounds ahead, they were still separated from the Avengers community by a barbed wire fence. As for why it was barbed wire, rather than a wooden wall or some other garbled barrier, the reason was simple, pure bad taste. After all, Anyone who had gone through military training knew how excruciating a midnight emergency muster could be. How much more comfortable it would be to be able to watch the action or sleep peacefully at home during such times. This was surprisingly easy to achieve, as the students lived with Sherlock's 5 uncles, the instructors at the training ground. Simply asking or getting advance notice from Sherlock's uncles would have been a piece of cake. Even Black Widow dragged Hawkeye and Price into discussion about when they could experience the joy of being an instructor and teaching the students during an emergency assembly. Sherlock toured his newly renovated training grounds while listening to the discussion, silently making a large cross on his chest for the returning students. Damn, there aren't any good people here. Compared to Black Widow's wicked tastes, Hawkeye, the son of an elf, was quite interested in the forest behind Sherlock's training grounds. That area was also Sherlock's land. After the training grounds were established, Price had already purchased all the surrounding land. The forest behind was only used as a backup resource, occasionally serving as a training ground. Of course, Pepper hadn't forgotten the fish pond that had always been Sherlock and Tony's source of joy. She had dedicated a section of land in front of the dormitory building to create a fish pond for Sherlock and Tony, the 2 old anglers. She even left a small vegetable patch for Sherlock to use when his racial talent occasionally awakened. Anyway, Sherlock's renovations were nearly complete, and Sherlock himself was quite pleased with his new 2-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment, so he didn't comment. It had to be said that Tony's Iron Man suit hadn't been turned into fireworks thanks to Sherlock, but had instead become the Iron Engineering Team, a truly remarkable achievement. Under Jarvis's control, the Iron Engineering Team's infrastructure construction speed rivaled that of rabbits imbued with mysterious Eastern power. In less than 2 days after Sherlock's release, the entire training ground was complete. Looking at the newly renovated training ground and his villa-like living space, Sherlock nodded in satisfaction. He, Tony, and Hawkeye grabbed their partner and went fishing in the pond. They were determined to turn Hawkeye, the forest-loving elf, into a fishing prodigy. And surprisingly, they succeeded, and Hawkeye actually became hooked. However, Sherlock and Tony began to tire of the sport, nearly breaking their rods at one point. The reason was simple. Heck, I don't even know if fishing has a beginner's protection period or something. Hawkeye had no luck catching anything. Sherlock and Tony hadn't caught anything for 2 days. On the 3rd day, Tony even donned a suit of armor to go fishing, and Sherlock pulled out his wand. Oh, and by the way, Tony's suit, which he named the Mark 45 Angler, is a specialized suit for anglers, nicknamed Never Catch a Catch. It sounded impressive, but it was useless. Tony and Sherlock kept catching nothing. Furious, Tony was about to activate his suit to pump water, while Sherlock, waving his wand, was determined to teach these ungrateful fish a lesson. In the end, Hawkeye, stifling a laugh, summoned Pepper Potts and each took her back by an ear. Oh, and compared to the other 2, Hawkeye was undoubtedly the winner. At Black Widow's suggestion, he brought his wife over just in time for her upcoming birth. Looking across New York, there wasn't a place with better medical facilities than Sherlock's, so Hawkeye's first child was born in Sherlock's training ground. As the youngest in his training ground, Sherlock had to show his appreciation, so he explained to Hawkeye and his sister-in-law the mysterious Eastern ritual of confinement. And so began Hawkeye's miserable confinement life. Sherlock laughed wildly at this, saying, "You old fool, let me laugh at you, the Air Force." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291 I Want Team Building. A full week had passed since he emerged from his seclusion, and Sherlock had been living it up to the brim. A single cut would make a working man's eyes blaze with envy, wishing he could devour her raw flesh and drink her blood. Upon waking up in his brand new little villa, Sherlock calmly changed into his swimming trunks and headed to the pool for a morning exercise of a few laps. While this habit had been forced upon him by Price at gunpoint, as Sherlock had acted as if he had forgotten his training during the operation, considering Black Widow, Antonia, and the 2 other girls also had this habit, Sherlock let it go. After all, what straight man doesn't love the sight of a beautiful woman in a swimsuit? Of course, the beauty in a swimsuit here refers only to Black Widow. Antonia, compared to the 2 girls and Black Widow, leaves room for improvement. After his morning exercise, Sherlock ate a quick breakfast and checked to see if Tony, who had been enjoying himself lately, was there. If he was, they'd grab their fishing rods and head out for their Air Force adventure. If he wasn't around, Sherlock didn't care. He'd shoulder his hoe and head to his vegetable garden, weeding, watering, and fertilizing, a playful activity that could last all day. True to being the soul of the rabbit family, this kind of farm work brought Sherlock exceptional joy. This continued into the evening, when Sherlock would take care of the meals for all the Avengers, Team 141, and the two little girls, becoming their designated chef. Sherlock had resisted, but firstly, the cooking of everyone else besides Sherlock was mostly just okay. It was impossible to match the delicious flavors Sherlock had cultivated through his Chinese cuisine. Secondly, when Sherlock protested, Black Widow and his uncles showed no mercy. Black Widow pointed out the scene she'd seen Sherlock cooking at his house, stating that the captain had already told them. After trying the pig food the others had prepared, Sherlock's 5 uncles simply drew their guns. No matter how powerful Sherlock was, he couldn't simultaneously resist 5 black gun barrels pointed at his head, right? Besides, Sherlock loved cooking so much that he naturally assumed the responsibility of being a chef. Well, it wasn't that he was afraid of his uncle's intimidation, absolutely not. As for Tony, well, he lived an even more carefree life than Sherlock. For an entire week, he was either driving to the office with Pepper Potts, hanging out together, or pestering Pepper Potts until she got annoyed and was left alone at home. Meanwhile, Tony waited patiently for Sherlock to come find him with his fishing rod. Fishing is undoubtedly a man's favorite pastime, even for a billionaire like Tony. As for Black Widow, her life was even more comfortable. No life or death missions, no scheming with enemies, just the simple life she dreamed of. In the morning, she took her apprentice Antonia and the 2 little girls for morning exercises, and then found time to train the 3 of them. The 2 little girls were especially fond of Black Widow, and it could be said that they were almost the apple of her eye. Perhaps it was because of her age. Black Widow was particularly fond of children, and the 2 little girls happened to be very cute. Therefore, Black Widow was full of maternal love for these 2 little followers, and almost responded to their every request. After the morning training, while the 3 of them were resting, Black Widow would occasionally follow Black Widow in the tower to the women's training ground, occasionally playing the role of teacher. I dare not say anything else, but Black Widow's rich spy experience was far beyond the reach of the ordinary Black Widows in the Red Room. Therefore, it took Black Widow less than 2 days to become a gold medal instructor in the women's training camp. Even when Black Widow occasionally taught, many Black Widows would come to listen. And those wealthy wives, let alone the others, were even more daunting. An Avenger was giving her a lesson, charging her nothing extra. Coupled with the fact that after SHIELD revealed her life story, which Shiv and Hollywood wouldn't dare write about, Black Widow could easily offer a solution to almost any of their problems. As for the rarely seen Hawkeye, well, he shouldn't be called Hawkeye anymore, he's practically become Hawkeye. Thanks to Sherlock's bluffing about some magical Eastern postpartum confinement ritual, and the fact that Sherlock knew magic and kept spouting technical terms like ritual magic, Mrs. Hawkeye was stunned and actually believed Sherlock's words. After all, postpartum confinement doesn't exist in Europe and America. Women might give birth in the morning and drive home with their babies in the afternoon. It's foreseeable that for the next few weeks, Hawkeye will continue to be preoccupied with his wife and children, rarely appearing to mingle with the public. Even when he occasionally spotted Hawkeye, he looked sleep-deprived, dark circles etched beneath his eyes, his hair a mess, comparable to Mei Cheofang's. Wearing the dignified air of Hawkeye, he glared fiercely at Sherlock and Tony, who flashed a strange smile upon seeing him, and then hurried away. If Sherlock hadn't mentioned it, who would have guessed this was the superhero who once stood atop a New York skyscraper, shooting aliens with a bow and arrow? Compared to the Avengers' leisurely pace, Team 141, led by Price, was far busier. Due to the expansion of the training ground, Price had been working with a steel engineering team to add training equipment since Sherlock's release. Sherlock had even visited the training grounds and equipment designed by Price, and after seeing them, he had only one thought: I hope those trainees will have a peaceful death upon their return. After just a week of such peaceful days, Sherlock couldn't sit still anymore. While leisurely days are wonderful, they're a little too dull, aren't they? Being naturally active, Sherlock couldn't handle it any longer, so when everyone gathered that evening, he proposed his own idea. I want a team building, Almost everyone agreed with Sherlock's idea, except for Hawkeye. His wife had just given birth, and the child wasn't even a month old yet, so Hawkeye couldn't leave and decided to stay home to take care of her and the baby. Besides Hawkeye, almost everyone agreed. Even Plath and the others disagreed. After all, the training ground had just been built, and they still had to wait for the cement and other materials to dry and solidify before school could reopen. They were waiting anyway, so why not just do the team building she suggested? So, everyone began to discuss the destination. In the end, Sherlock won, because the destination he proposed was the only one of its kind in the world, and none of the people involved had ever been there. The Qinghai Tibet Plateau. Chapter 292 Group Building 1. After deciding on their destination, everyone began discussing travel methods. Tony suggested a direct flight, which would save time, effort, and be convenient. He had a private jet, so they wouldn't have to buy tickets from the airlines and could leave any time. The two girls and Antonia, fans of Sherlock's magic, desperately wanted him to use his magic to take them there, so they could experience the wonders of magic. Black Widow and 141, due to their special status, preferred an unofficial route, such as the Continental Hotel. After all, they were either ruthless executioners or veteran spies active around the world, so a bit of secrecy was always a plus. Sherlock, the initiator, had a completely different idea. He wanted to take the train. Yes, the familiar green train. According to Sherlock, the point of travel isn't taking photos, but enjoying the scenery along the way. Driving was too tiring, so the train was just the ticket. After Sherlock's enthusiastic pep talk, his train trip ultimately won the majority of votes. Now that the destination and how to get there were already decided, there was only one remaining problem. Everyone present lacked an ID, so buying a greenskin train ticket was a no-brainer. This train was a popular route, so tickets were available on the spot. However, for those present, their youth was priceless, and forcing them to sit directly to LS was a bit of a burden. And if they had to sit directly to LS, their first move after getting off the train would probably be to kick Sherlock. After all, the situation there was different. Beating children wasn't considered a crime, and the police wouldn't even bother. Ultimately, the decision to resolve the matter fell to Pepper Potts, who said it wasn't a big deal and could be easily resolved. So, on a sunny morning, the president of Stark Group Greater China sat contentedly in his office, eating the pancakes his secretary had just bought while he checked his computer to see if he had any important emails. Then, in her inbox, she found a work email from Virginia Pepper Potts, CEO of the group's headquarters. The CEO was so startled that she spat out a mouthful of pancake onto her computer screen, followed by a loud explosion that could be heard throughout the building. Little Pepper's email didn't mention any work matters. Instead, it simply requested that the CEO buy 12 train tickets from Shanghai to Los Angeles, even including several people's identification information. As a member of Greater China's Chinese restaurant group, how could she not take such a request seriously? She immediately assigned her staff to handle the matter, determined to ensure it was carried out to the letter. The secretary, who received the order, was also a man of action, immediately assigned an entire department to handle the task. The secretary proved to be incredibly reliable, completing the task perfectly. However, while the task was completed, the China Railway Corporation was left bewildered. The China Railway Corporation's backstage staff scratched their heads as they looked at the names of the 12 passengers on this train. After checking the booking information several times and confirming it was indeed the person they often saw on TV, they immediately reported the situation to their superiors. You have to understand that, aside from the three lawless, the names on the list were all well-known figures in various countries. Sherlock, the owner of an underground training ground, was the least important of them all. The remaining Black Widow, Tony, the members of Team 141, and even Pepper Potts, if released, would either cause a local war or destabilize the economy of a small country. And even Sherlock, the least important, would require several plainclothes officers to follow him around if you were in Rabbit's position. Now these players were actually going on a group trip, and they'd chosen a big green train. China Railway Corporation felt his CPU fizzle as he read the report presented by his subordinates. But refusing to buy tickets isn't the right approach. From their identities to the price of their tickets, there's nothing wrong with these people. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't come up with a reason. Faced with such a bizarre situation, even the head of the Ministry of Railways didn't know what to do. But as the saying goes, Even if the sky falls, there are still 12 people to hold it up. Unsure of what to do, the only option left was to report it. So, on a bright, sunny afternoon, a bunny at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was one moment contemplating how to taunt those foreign assholes. The next, he picked up a report, his face wrinkled in confusion. Damn it. I've been a troll for too long. Am I hallucinating from trolling those assholes? Was the bunny's first reaction upon seeing the report in his hands. He rubbed his eyes fiercely, then examined it carefully. Finally, he confirmed it was real. Even though it still felt like a joke, the way he looked at it was. However, out of a cautious work ethic, the diplomatic rabbit still called the Iron General to understand the situation, confirming it wasn't some idle joke or some new ploy from the Iron General. After all, the diplomatic rabbit had once worked for the defense rabbit, and the Three Armies' elaborate plea for poverty had driven him to the brink of PTSD. On the phone, the Iron General practically killed a random worker to prove he wasn't kidding, and that this wasn't just some random new tactic to beg for a budget. After confirming the truth of the matter, the diplomatic rabbit was left speechless. He felt like the president was about to take on the greenskin role. How the hell was he supposed to do this? He'd never done this before. He had no experience. The diplomatic rabbit wasn't exaggerating. After all, Tony Stark's Stark Enterprises was a global megacorporation, and his influence rivaled that of the leaders of smaller nations. He was also a world-renowned superhero. Any misstep would be a diplomatic disaster. But why would such a troublesome individual take on the greenskin role? Fine, you're a greenskin, so be it. Just let us know so we can make some arrangements. This guy actually bought his own ticket? He bought a ticket, but do you want to see who you're bringing with you? Aside from that girl, who looks like a family member, every one of those people deserves at least a team of plainclothes officers to secretly follow them. Especially that guy named Sherlock. Good man, you're the nephew of the world's richest man, what could you do differently? Why do you have to run a business that would get you shot within an hour of being put here? Diplomatic Rabbit felt his headache even more. Chapter 293 Group Building 2. Sherlock had no idea that his desire for a team-building trip had left many of the rabbits thousands of miles away scratching their heads until they were practically bald. They happily began packing their belongings. After all, it was a high-altitude trip, their first, and everyone was incredibly excited. They'd already begun packing their belongings and supplies. But the more they packed, the more problems they faced. The most pressing one was the language. Aside from Sherlock, the contestant with a rabbit soul, who understood the rabbit language perfectly, only Black Widow, the veteran spy, could manage a rudimentary reading and writing of the language. The rest were completely bewildered. Not only could they not write, but even in Sherlock's impromptu rabbit language class, these top-tier human fighters couldn't even grasp something as basic as intonation. Even Black Widow was puzzled by the first, second, third, and fourth tones in the language. Damn it. Can you imagine how the four characters for Mama and Ma are pronounced the same way, but with a different intonation? They become Mama? They couldn't even speak properly, let alone write. Only after Sherlock started teaching did he finally confirm one thing. In his previous life, he wasn't kidding when he saw online that foreigners couldn't see the same Chinese characters as they did when they drew them. Now, Sherlock could truly experience the jokes he'd only seen online in his previous life, like the most basic character tutorials. Sherlock, this is 1. Everyone, oh, I see, Sherlock, this is 2. Everyone, I think I'm starting to see a pattern, Sherlock, this is 3. Everyone, as expected. Not surprising. Little bunny talk, got it right, Sherlock, this is 0. Everyone, what the FCK? Can a human write that? After about 3 days of effort, seeing everyone gradually becoming frustrated, Sherlock decisively gave up. It's true, nothing is impossible if you're willing to give up. Sherlock had given up. Whatever he wanted, he couldn't teach her. He couldn't teach her at all. He now completely understood how his elementary school teacher had felt when he was a kid. Seeing that learning was impossible, and even crash testing reading and writing was impossible, Tony, the smartest member of the team, not only looked at Sherlock, who looked like a lost fish, with a glare of how the hell can you even learn this, but also decisively decided to cheat everyone. As for how to cheat, it was simple. Tony, who hadn't been to the lab since his release, dove headfirst into it and, after a long day of hard work, A pair of real-time translation AR glasses powered by the most powerful artificial intelligence, Jarvis, were born. These glasses displayed Chinese English translations in the wearer's field of view, and leveraged Jarvis's powerful computing power to translate Chinese into English in real time. These glasses effectively solved the problem of people getting lost due to language differences. Sherlock finally regained his composure and began to educate everyone on important matters. Of course, the most important thing to know was, if you have any problems, go to the police. Sherlock repeated this phrase countless times during his educational session, striving to ingrain it into everyone's minds. Although he felt like laughing at the thought of men like Price, brimming with murderous intent, or the Avengers, who had once fought off aliens, running helplessly to the nearby police stations, he still repeatedly emphasized the importance of this matter. Of course, aside from common sense and language training, everyone also had to contend with altitude sickness. While everyone seemed incredibly muscular and capable of easily sprinting through a vast enemy, altitude sickness was a difficult situation to predict. After all, altitude sickness is known to prey on the young, the old, the fat, the strong, and the men, and yet, everyone here was predominantly the strongest. So, for a whole week, everyone, who had previously led regular and healthy lives, skipped aerobic exercise for this trip and went into a collective slump. It didn't matter that everyone else was lazing around, but it was tough on Hawkeye, the guy who couldn't go. After all, the others were forced to take a break to combat altitude sickness, while Hawkeye, the athlete who couldn't go, had to keep up his training. Furthermore, thanks to Sherlock's deception, the daily sprint was already a rare moment of relaxation for Hawkeye. But now, even this time of relaxation wasn't making Hawkeye happy. After all, no one could resist him while he was running. 12 people were sprawled on lounge chairs at the edge of the field, ice-cold beers in hand, commenting on Hawkeye's workout. The criticism was fine, but when they felt like it, they even played coach, pretending to provoke Hawkeye with movie-like encouragement, verbal abuse, and sarcastic remarks. Hawkeye had experienced it all. After a few days, for the first time in his life, Hawkeye prayed for them to get out and stop bothering him. It was too much? Of course, Hawkeye had considered resisting, and he had tried, like running at a different time. These damn beasts wouldn't let him go. If he changed his schedule to a morning run, he'd see no one on the first lap, but on the second lap, they'd definitely show up on recliners, beer in hand, and salute him. Even on a night run, it was the same. No matter how early he woke up or how late he left for a run, these beasts would show up right next to the track on the second lap, as if by appointment. Hawkeye said he was tired and gave up, letting things take their course. While everyone was furiously preparing for their team-building session, Rabbit had also made numerous plans for Sherlock's. Finally, the day before Sherlock and his group were set to depart, Sherlock's training grounds welcomed an unexpected visitor, the Rabbit ambassador to Hawkeye. The ambassador's purpose for this visit was simple: first, to determine what these people were up to. After all, the idea of a bunch of villains coming to his house to take over the green leather jacket was a bit strange. The second thing is that I want to discuss the accompanying personnel with this group of people. After all, even if we don't consider the influence of this group of people, and only look at their combat effectiveness, for the sake of the people in Rabbit's family, Rabbit has to send someone to contact them. Chapter 294 Group Building 3. The ambassador's arrival surprised the entire training ground, especially Sherlock. Because of his business, Sherlock was actually quite reluctant to interact with politicians. After all, in Sherlock's opinion, the officials in the Eagle Sauce were, well, how can I describe them? They were just bizarre and stupid, the kind of bizarre that made you wonder, how could they even do that? However, Sherlock remained friendly to his own people, even treating the master to a taste of his cooking. The two sides had a pleasant discussion, and Sherlock naturally didn't forget his business. Although this was illegal on the Rabbit side, he welcomed the ambassador to send people to his training ground at any time, but of course, the training ground rules still had to be followed. The ambassador happily agreed and promised Sherlock that he would arrange it. After all, this was a great opportunity to learn about foreign military training methods. Only a fool would agree. As for Sherlock, he didn't think too much about it. The thought of building ties with his home country and earning a little money was enough to make him smile so much that his mouth almost reached behind his ears. Of course, the ambassador hadn't forgotten the main purpose of his visit, repeatedly confirming with everyone what they were doing. Sherlock patiently assured the ambassador that it was simply a trip. The ambassador was stunned. What kind of billionaire would take a bunch of 100-man killer athletes on a greenskin trip? The ambassador said, I don't understand, but I'm deeply shocked. Sherlock, of course, saw how outrageous this sounds sign on the ambassador's face, and without hesitation, he began to spout off all sorts of inspirational quotes about the LS rhymes like youth has no price and take a ride straight to the LS flowed out without a word. Half an hour later, Sherlock was completely exhausted. He was completely exhausted. No one could handle such a barrage of intellectual quotations and catchy sayings. Besides, Sherlock didn't look like he was planning to apply to graduate school here at Rabbit, so why was he spouting these catchy sayings? Regardless of how outrageous and seemingly illogical the situation seemed, the ambassador ultimately confirmed one thing: this group of people truly intended to travel as green-skinned bastards. Ultimately, he could only sigh inwardly at the whims of capitalists as they knew how to play it, while making a request to Sherlock for people to accompany them. After all, Sherlock's group was a bit too intimidating, each killing 100 people, literally, 100 people, not just some random one. The ambassador was also wary of any mishaps. Sherlock's eyes lit up at the ambassador's request. What the hell, a pillow for a moment. He didn't even need a guide? Fearing the ambassador would change his mind, he quickly agreed, and even requested that women be included, since he had quite a few women on his side. Of course, it would be even better if they could temporarily act as tour guide or leader while they explored Tibetan culture. Sherlock even offered to cover all the food, accommodation, and transportation for the 4 people, all expenses paid. The ambassador's lips twitched at this. He didn't know why, but even though the guy across from him was very cooperative, he couldn't seem to find any evidence. Even on the way back, the ambassador's assistant, driving the car, couldn't understand why the ambassador had agreed so quickly to the request for 4 escorts, even including food and lodging. After all, the Eagle Sauce people are notoriously concerned about privacy. However, one thing is certain, these 4 people weren't actually assigned to guard the group, their primary purpose was to protect the petty thieves. After all, it was just a little theft, not a crime worthy of the highest level of special forces, the Avengers, or the veteran spies who'd killed countless people. Well, the point is, the crime wasn't punishable by death. God knows how devastated the thief would have been if it weren't for these 4 people. I just stole a wallet, and you called in the army, and you even brought in the Avengers. Well, as for Sherlock, yes, Sherlock was just hoping for a free ride. This was a guide issued by the government, damn. Could anything be more reliable in the world? By the time Ambassador Week arrived, it felt like a dream. After all, the place was filled with eagles. Perhaps it was just habit, and this was the first time the ambassador had negotiated with them so smoothly. It almost seemed unreal. But at least the matter was resolved. After the ambassador reported the details of the meeting, the rabbits in the South China Sea twitched their lips as they read the ambassador's report. Sherlock's petty thoughts were no different from those of a child in front of such a powerful figure. But in the end, the big rabbit waved his hand and agreed to Sherlock's proposal, selecting 2 men and 2 women with extensive experience in the snowy regions to carry out the mission. The selected comrades, upon reading the mission briefing, were completely visibly shaken. One woman even kicked a nearby man hard, causing him to clutch his instep and jump for a long time in pain. In response to her companion's accusations, the woman calmly replied, "Oh, nothing, it's just that this mission seems ridiculous. I need to make sure I am not dreaming." Then, she focused on her mission briefing, completely ignoring the man's aggrieved complaint, "Why don't you step on yourself?" Regardless, this team-building trip was already on the verge of being launched. After completing all preparations, Sherlock sent the ambassador his and his group's itinerary a day in advance, and the next day, the group happily packed their luggage and headed to the airport. According to the plan, they would land at Pudong Airport, then explore Shanghai for 3 days, before boarding the greenskin train to LS before 6:30 p.m. on the 3rd day, embarking on a day and a half of train travel. Upon receiving Sherlock's itinerary, the ambassador promptly reported it. The order was issued quickly, and soon the 2 men and 2 women were notified of the impending mission. Along with the notice, they also received soft sleeper tickets for the same train as Sherlock and the others. Looking at the notice, then the tickets, then the treatment and tour guide briefings they'd memorized for the past few days, the 4 finally confirmed that this seemingly outrageous mission was actually real. Chapter 295 3-Day Trip to the Magic City 1. With a roar of its engines, a massive passenger plane bearing the Stark Group logo touched down at Shanghai's Pudong Airport. Yes, it was Sherlock's group's private jet. Thanks to Tony for donating his private jet for the first leg of their trip. As the plane touched down, 4 well-dressed escorts arranged by Rabbit were already waiting at the VIP exit. Due to the unique nature of this exit, they didn't hold up signs, they simply stood there, waiting for Sherlock's group. Soon, Sherlock's group emerged, led by none other than the current CEO of Stark Group, the woman who could unleash an economic upheaval, Pepper Potts. Behind Pepper were Black Widow and Antonia, followed by Sherlock's 2 young wives. The group of women, carrying no luggage, looked like celebrities on a night out. While their attire varied, their style remained remarkably uniform, and they all wore Tony Jarvis brand interpreter glasses. Walking together, they gave off a somewhat girl group vibe, given their striking figures and attractive looks. Compared to the women's elegance and beauty, the men following behind them looked a bit more shabby. While each wore a suitcase, like the preceding women, and sported matching glasses, they were strikingly stylish, but the suitcases they each held undermined the group's overall presence. They looked more like a security detail than a boy band. Price and Soap were particularly striking. Each carried a standard suitcase in one hand, while the other dragged a tiny, pink suitcase emblazoned with a cute little fox. From the look of things, it wasn't hard to guess that the suitcases belonged to the 2 young girls. Compared to everyone else, Sherlock's style stood out as distinct. While everyone else seemed to be walking down a runway, their suits imperative to be wrinkle-free even while carrying suitcases, Sherlock wore a casual hoodie, a baseball cap, slacks, and a pair of AJ shoes. He looked as casual as could be. But even if you could call his style consistent, that was just the beginning. Sherlock, despite his casual attire, held a distinctly Rabbit-esque gadget, a telescoping pole topped with a small flag bearing the name of the Sherlock Tour Group. While Sherlock's style didn't fit in with the rest of the group, he still looked dignified and elegant overall. But for some reason, the small flag gave him a certain air of commercialism. As the only member of the group fluent in Chinese, Sherlock immediately spotted the 4 people accompanying him at the entrance upon exiting the station. He instantly recognized them as the Rabbit's assigned escorts. The reason was simple. As a time traveler who had lived among rabbits for a long time, Sherlock was incredibly familiar with the clothing these 4 people wore. Crucially, aside from the business rabbits, few people would buy this kind of clothing, especially young people. That's right, executive jackets. While the 2 women were wearing ordinary business attire, the jackets on the 2 men in the lead were so striking that Sherlock had no doubt they were mistaken. Upon seeing the 4, Sherlock didn't hesitate, rushing forward to shake their hands and exchange pleasantries. After a series of standard interview phrases, Sherlock saw the confusion in the 4 people's slightly twitching mouths and learned their code names, A, B, C, and D. Indeed, although these 4 were accompanying personnel, and this trip was no different from a vacation for them, due to work requirements, they couldn't tell Sherlock their real names. Sherlock didn't care. Who cares if it's A, B, C, D, or ABCD? He was a freelance tour guide, so why bother? Seeing that Sherlock had no problem with his code name, as if he'd known it all along, member A of the foursome breathed a sigh of relief and quickly ushered Sherlock out to the parking lot. They'd specially arranged a coaster for this trip as a reception vehicle. Sherlock, as if at home, chatted with member A while holding up his small flag and leading the group to the vehicles. Following behind member A, members B, C, and D exchanged glances upon hearing Sherlock's perfectly standard civil service exam reception line. Member B, damn it. Why does this little foreigner give me the impression he scored higher on the essay than I did? Member C, you're right. Just that little trick I just used. In all my years, I've only ever seen it on candidates from Shandong. I wouldn't believe it if I didn't have decades of experience. The youngest, Ding, caught the two's gazes, her beautiful eyes widening as she looked at C and B with horror. Ding, shit. Oh no. Has our national treasure been leaked? At Ding's rant, B and C rolled their eyes and said nothing more. Pulling the still shocked Ding, they quickly caught up with the main group. You'd have to say, this was the first time in Sherlock's 2 lifetimes combined that he'd sat in a coaster. Gazing out the window at the scenery, which was virtually identical to his last, Sherlock felt a surge of emotion. It was like a return home in disguise. Of course, despite his excitement, he couldn't resist the physical exhaustion. Jet lag is a truly fascinating thing. Sherlock and his group had left at night, and it was still night when they arrived in Shanghai. But it was all good. Having such an unfortunate thing as jet lag was still a good thing. Fortunately, Sherlock and his group had already booked a hotel before they set off. It wasn't a top hotel, just a Hilton. Although it was a 5-star hotel, it wasn't actually luxurious compared to other 5-star hotels. Of course, Sherlock didn't forget about A, B, C, and D, and he booked rooms for them on the same floor. He said that all-inclusive food and lodging was included, so it was definitely all-inclusive. Following the address Sherlock gave, the coaster drove to the hotel entrance in a hurry, and everyone checked in without hesitation. Originally, according to A's plan, the coaster would be their means of transportation during their stay in Shanghai, but what A, B, C, and D never expected was that Sherlock and his group were so down to earth and didn't play by the rules. The good coaster was only used once as a pickup vehicle and was never used again. Chapter 296 3-Day Trip to the Magic City 2. The next morning, around 7 o'clock, A, B, C, and D spotted Sherlock and his group of 12 listlessly eating breakfast in the hotel restaurant on the second floor. Compared to yesterday, when they looked like celebrities fresh off the catwalk, Sherlock and his group today were undoubtedly more busy. At least none of them wore formal suits anymore, replaced by a variety of casual attire. Upon seeing A, B, C, and D, Sherlock immediately waved excitedly, gesturing for them to join him for breakfast. The four of them exchanged glances and immediately made their way towards Sherlock and his group. It's true that anyone who could reach the level of A, B, C, and D was no fool. Over just breakfast, they had become familiar with Sherlock and his group, at least able to communicate normally. Yesterday, due to exhaustion, Sherlock and his group hadn't noticed this, and had instead ignored A, B, C, and D. Although breakfast was a buffet, it was a truly delightful meal, especially for Sherlock's group, who, with the exception of Sherlock, marveled at the richness and deliciousness of the rabbit breakfast. It's no wonder Tony and Sherlock's 5 uncles were so surprised. After all, in the West, breakfast is usually meat, eggs, milk, or hamburgers, especially among the wealthy, who, with their exceptional focus on health, eat a very simple diet. Bread was considered a finely prepared item among them. It was only after Sherlock's arrival that Tony and his group realized what a meager life they'd been living. However, since Sherlock preferred to stay in the mornings, the group had to make their own breakfast. If Sherlock hadn't been missing the taste of steamed buns and soy milk so much, he wouldn't have gotten up early. Of course, all the joy A, B, C, and D had felt during breakfast froze as they finished eating and prepared to leave. The reason was simple: Sherlock and his group had no intention of taking the coaster that A, B, C, and D had arranged. According to Sherlock, if it's purely for fun, then you need to deeply experience the local life. That's what travel truly means. And so, guided by Sherlock's small flag, the group rushed to the Shanghai subway station. Amidst the suicidal expressions of A, B, C, and D, it was wonderful at first. Everything about the Shanghai subway was new to the group. After all, the New York subway was practically a world-shaking sight. Compared to our own, impeccably clean, reflective, and supremely safe subway system, the New York subway was incredibly diverse and expansive. The New York subway was packed with things you couldn't imagine. Generally speaking, it can be categorized into 2 main groups: living things and inanimate objects. Living things are further divided into 3 categories: humans, humanoids, and animals. Humans and animals, aside from humans and animals, are essentially just ordinary people and small critters like rats and stray animals. The humanoids themselves are truly diverse. You have to know that the US has always valued individuality, so any unusual hobbies you see here are considered perfectly normal. While these humanoids undoubtedly share human genes, their appearance is anything but human. As long as they're not human, they can resemble anything. Sherlock, out of curiosity, witnessed a rat man calmly sitting in his seat, even speaking in a squeaking sound, clearly immersed in the role. Inanimate objects are even more fascinating and can be broadly divided into 3 categories: garbage, excrement, and tools. Excluding excrement, anything removed from the body counts. You can let your imagination run wild. The garbage itself is enough to be fascinating. In the New York subway, you can find nearly every granular item in the garbage classification, from gold jewelry to bone fragments you've never seen before. As for tools, even bicycles are considered normal. It was that rat man again. Sherlock still remembered it. He was sitting on a self-moving sofa on the subway. Honestly, if the smell inside the subway hadn't been so intense that Sherlock couldn't remove his hands from his face, his jaw would have dropped. Sherlock had only experienced the New York subway once, so he declined any further requests. But one thing was certain. What those public intellectuals said before his time travel about people in foreign subways reading was true. Sherlock had personally verified it, absolutely true. Almost everyone had a book. But the main reason for everyone having a book was that there was no cell phone signal in the subway station. Honestly, if it weren't for that rat man, Sherlock would have been able to enjoy it. He would have rushed out at the next stop. The experience was simply too bad. Of course, the Shanghai subway wasn't much better, but that wasn't the Shanghai subway's fault at all. It was Sherlock's own fault. Well, although the plan was well planned and the facilities inside the Shanghai subway were excellent, I think Sherlock and the others forgot one thing: the damn rush hour. This is also the main reason why A, B, C, and D all looked so hopeless. After all, anyone who has experienced the subway's rush hour knows the pain of being squeezed so hard that their feet are off the ground. But since we're here, right? Initially, Tony, Black Widow, and Sherlock's 5 uncles were saying, "Isn't it just a small rush hour? Which of us gentlemen didn't fight our way through mountains of blood and corpses?" Got it. By the time everyone got off the train, it looked like their souls had been sucked out of them. Even Tony's hair was a mess. But at least he was still alive, which was a blessing in disguise. But let's be honest, when you're no longer hustling for life, even the battlefield like rush hour can bring you interesting things. Take Sherlock, for example. Despite the packed train, Sherlock, standing next to Tony, witnessed a young woman being squeezed into Tony's arms. When she looked up and saw Tony's face, she nearly cried out in delight. But then, as if a thought struck her, the surprise quickly faded, perhaps reflecting on the supposedly unsuitable presence of billionaire superhero Tony Stark, Iron Man, on the Shanghai subway during rush hour. Even after confirming that Tony was a supposed imposter, the young woman excitedly struggled to free a hand. Using her finger, which the man next to her struggled to grasp at a warning light, she swiped her phone to the camera, allowing her to secretly snap a photo with Tony. If the train hadn't been so packed, Sherlock would have rolled on the floor in laughter. As for Tony, well, he was so squeezed that he couldn't even keep his hands down, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender the entire time. How could he possibly care about the young woman's movements? Chapter 297: 3-Day Trip to the Magic City 3. After exiting the subway, Tony immediately told Sherlock that the arrangement was excellent and that he shouldn't make it next time. Sherlock admitted that it was his fault, that he'd been so busy that he'd forgotten about the morning rush hour, and he would correct it immediately. Honestly, it wasn't just Tony, even the battle-hardened Price and the others were horrified by the morning rush hour in Shanghai and were skeptical of Sherlock. Forget experiencing it firsthand, the last time they'd seen a train car packed like sardines was during World War II, when the oil removal master, Little Mustache, was transporting oil to a concentration camp. Fortunately, A intervened to smooth things over for Sherlock, explaining that the crowds were only so severe during the morning rush hour and that things would be fine after the rush hour. With a local's testimony, the others finally let Sherlock off, and Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief. At home, Sherlock would have been out in the cold by now, but now that he was out in the open, Price and the others had at least given him some respect. After all, these were just ordinary people's daily lives, weren't they? It was a glimpse into local life. The place where they got off the bus wasn't far from Yew Garden, and whether it was Sherlock, Tony, Price, or Black Widow, they were all fascinated by this ancient building imbued with Chinese aesthetics. In his previous life, Sherlock had visited Shanghai twice, but neither time had he entered one of Shanghai's most famous ancient gardens. Now, given the chance to experience it, he certainly wouldn't turn it down. The group immediately bought tickets and entered the 4A-rated scenic area. Once through the gate, Sherlock handed the small flag to the leader, A, and even dug out a small megaphone from somewhere and thrust it into the bewildered A's hand. Then, hiding in the group, he looked at A expectantly. A, somewhat bewildered, glanced at the flag and megaphone, then at Sherlock and his group, who looked expectantly. Then, he turned and looked at B, C, and D, who had their backs turned, their shoulders shaking as if they were chuckling. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, he took on the role of tour guide. You betcha, you betcha. These state-issued items are just awesome. Person A was eloquently chattering along the way, recounting anecdotes about everything he encountered. With Person B, Person C, and Person D rounding out the group, Sherlock was thoroughly engrossed. Not only Sherlock, but even the usually reserved Price was beaming, taking out his phone and snapping photos. Sherlock stole a glance and noticed Price was particularly fascinated by the pavilions and towers within Yew Garden. He was particularly drawn to the brackets and mortise and tenon joints, which Price photographed endlessly, seemingly unable to stop. Curious, Sherlock asked Price why he was so drawn to them. Price's response was quite deft. He felt they were like rifles, operating simply by fitting together, possessing a rhythmic beauty that left Sherlock speechless. Compared to Price's hardcore hobby, the woman was much more normal. Led by Little Pepper, several women pulled C and D, who were also women, and found a full set of handfu from somewhere. The women happily changed into them one after another. Even C and D, who were accompanying them, were not spared. A group of women gathered together, wearing hanfu, the traditional costume of rabbits. And with such a beautiful scenery, what else could they do? Take pictures, of course. It is said that those who can get to the level of A, B, C, and D are not fools. C and D took charge of the photo taking. With photography technology that is one level higher than that of European and American versions and the blessing of photo editing software, they really captured everyone's unique characteristics clearly. Antonia's purity, Black Widow's charm, the cuteness of the two Lolita girls, Little Pepper's intelligence. If it weren't for the fact that their faces were a bit out of place with a hanfu, Sherlock would even think that these people had traveled from ancient times. C and D's photography skills immediately won over the women in the group, who were like, "I'm Wang Ting, I'm in charge." It goes to show that no matter where women go, as long as they can capture beautiful photos, they find pure joy. Tony even leaned in to take a look, astonished. He clamored to buy the hanfu suit Pepper was wearing, and then looked at A and B with resentment, as if to ask, "Why are you hiding this from us?" Seeing Tony's resentful expression, A and B once again lost their faith in Tony's wealthy, superhero image. Resigned, they joined the group of men in the hanfu shop. Tony changed into a FIU suit, admiring himself in the mirror for a moment, then happily ran over to Pepper's place, ready to snap a bunch of affectionate photos with her. Initially, Sherlock, Price, and the others hadn't shown much interest in this dress-up game, until Person B casually mentioned that the shop also rented and sold armor from various dynasties. Sherlock, unnerved, immediately stepped forward, expressing his desire to try it out. 10 minutes later, Sherlock, clad in Tang Dynasty Mingguang armor, joined C and D's photoshoot with a commanding presence. The imposing armor, paired with Sherlock's impeccable physique, honestly looked like a young general straight out of a picture book, were it not for his face. Pepper's eyes lit up at Sherlock's arrival, and she immediately abandoned Tony and dragged her nephew along for the photoshoot. Tony, with a hint of resentment, stared at Sherlock's armor. If it were just a dress-up game, Price, Soap, and the others might not be interested, but if it was something like armor related to war, Sherlock's 5 uncles were more than a little interested. 20 minutes later, 5 men, clad in armor, resembling generals fresh from the battlefield, appeared in C and D's photos. Even Ghost, who rarely showed his face, had changed into Song Dynasty Iron Pagoda. Through the barely visible eyes of the Iron Pagoda, Sherlock could clearly see that Ghost was now smiling broadly. The only unhappy person was probably Tony, who was wearing a FIU suit. Compared to the armor worn by Sherlock and the others, his FIU suit simply didn't hold a strong enough intimidation. Damn it. When he was changing into the FIU suit, the store manager had told him that it represented an ancient secret service agency, with the imperial privilege of executing first and reporting later. Those women just didn't know the value. Tony could only console himself with this indignant reassurance. But turning around and looking at A and B, who looked like they were like, "Are these people really as the information says?" and the flowing scholarly attire that Sherlock had casually slapped on them, Tony regained his composure. Tony recognized this costume. He'd seen it in a movie as a kid, like a scholar or something. Looking at his own FIU suit, Tony decided his own outfit was more glamorous. What Tony didn't know, however, was that the shopkeeper's line about the imperial power authorizing execution first and reporting later was actually a line from the movie called The Dongcheng. While he could mobilize Jinaiwei wearing FIU suits, to be frank, they were still eunuchs, weren't they? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298 3-Day Trip to the Magic City 4. For a whole day, Sherlock and his companions were taken by A, B, C, and D as they toured Yew Garden, visited the city god temple, enjoyed Nangxiang Zaya Long Bao, small dumplings, and even strolled the Bund in the evening. Tony treated them to a meal at the Peace Hotel before the whole process ended. The entire process was a perfect example of the legendary tourist experience. Although A, B, C, and D didn't say anything outwardly, they felt a sense of helplessness. It was like the sights in your city, you might never visit them again, but because you live there, your friends will inevitably take you on a tour of these same attractions you've already seen countless times. A, B, C, and D all felt this way. After all, they had lives and friends, and naturally experienced the same situations. But this time was different. It was all business. After all, friends can discuss matters, but business won't be refused. It was truly unlucky. Of course, besides A, B, C, and D, Sherlock was also feeling torn. After all, seeing people like Tony and Black Widow kneeling in the main hall of the city god temple, offering incense with devotion, would be torn, too. As for the rest of the trip, honestly, as a Westerner, the Bund wasn't particularly appealing to him. Sherlock noticed that the women seemed more interested in Nanjing Road Pedestrian Street. Well, Sherlock himself was quite interested. He still couldn't forget the amazing snacks he tried on Nanjing Road Pedestrian Street during his first visit to Shanghai. He was astonished. He wondered if Nanjing Road Pedestrian Street still existed in this world. The more he thought about it, the more nostalgic he became for those childhood snacks. He even became distracted while eating at the Peace Hotel, a place he hadn't been to twice in his previous life. As dusk fell, and everyone, exhausted from a long day of fun, returned to the hotel, Sherlock felt a growing sense of guilt. No, I had to go see it for myself. However, due to his status, he didn't want to cause any trouble. After much deliberation, Sherlock finally and sheepishly knocked on Person A's door. After accompanying everyone all day, Person A was exhausted. He had just finished showering and undressing for bed when there was a knock on his door. Thinking it was one of his companions, Person A carelessly opened the door to see Sherlock, fully dressed. A question mark slowly formed over Person A's head, and Sherlock didn't hesitate to state his purpose, to go to the snack street. Although Person A was grateful for Sherlock's idea and didn't want to cause any inconvenience to their work, he became increasingly puzzled. Finally, while changing his clothes, Person A expressed his doubts. Are we the only ones going? Don't you need to call others? Faced with Person A's doubt, Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance and answered with a nonchalant shrug. No, those wild boars can't eat fine bran. They can't even enjoy delicacies like stinky tofu. Hurry up, I'm dying of cravings. There's no place in the Eagle Sauce area that sells these delicacies. Sherlock's response was delivered in proper rabbit dialect. The perfectly pronounced wild boars can't eat fine bran, leaving A speechless. He even wondered if the guy across from him was actually an Eagle Sauce. He'd never seen that foreign guy so understanding of the rabbit dialect's essay writing style in snacks. Even today, while walking down the street, I kept thinking the guy in front of him spoke more like a rabbit than an Eagle Sauce. He'd never guessed he was actually a rabbit in Eagle Sauce's guise. Honestly, with a local, leading the way, Sherlock's sneaky snack hunt went surprisingly smoothly. After all, even if Sherlock had been to Shanghai in a previous life, it was as a tourist, and the snacks he bought were definitely from tourist attractions. But this time, A took Sherlock to a snack street only frequented by locals. Sherlock truly reveled in his food this time. Compared to the exquisite fare at the Peace Hotel, Sherlock preferred the down-to-earth, yet oily and spicy, food of the snack street. Watching Sherlock flaunt his food with abandon, occasionally stuffing food into his hands and urging him to join in, A's expression gradually shifted from incomprehension to kindness. You haven't had any good pork, was A's sole thought as he watched Sherlock devour his food with such ferocious abandon. However, A did notice, this kid had a strong palate, gravitating towards things like stinky tofu and snail noodles. Regardless of A's thoughts, Sherlock thoroughly enjoyed his meal. Even between his cravings, he patted A on the shoulder with his greasy hand, promising to write a letter of commendation to the ambassador upon his return, specifically mentioning AA's forehead was swollen with rage. There were so many complaints that A didn't even know where to begin. Sherlock finally burped, contentedly walking back to the hotel with a late-night snack of meatballs in his hand. In the hotel lobby, Sherlock saw Pepper, Tony and his group, and the serious faces of B, C, and D. Seeing Sherlock's mouth full of oil, his body suffused with the aroma of food, and burping, the anger intensified. What a guy. Eating alone, the men in the group exchanged glances and immediately surrounded Sherlock. The food in Sherlock's hands was immediately passed to the woman in the back. Tell me, where did you go without telling us? Seeing the crowd surrounding him, Sherlock decisively admitted defeat and looked at A, who had returned with him, with a look of help. Faced with Sherlock's pleading gaze, A shrugged helplessly, but still spoke. He asked me to accompany him to the snack street. Person A's words successfully captured everyone's attention, and they began to inquire about what the snack street was. After Person A finished explaining, Tony grabbed Sherlock's neck as he tried to sneak away and demanded a sharp question. Tell me, why didn't you take us with you, this time? Before Sherlock could even fire a pleading look, Person A launched into the conversation. Oh, he said you wild boars can't eat fine bran, so we had to go secretly. After hearing Person A's explanation, everyone smiled, though it was a sinister one. Price, with a forced smile, turned to Person A and asked, by the way, I heard beating children isn't illegal here, is it? Person A calmly gestured in invitation to Price's question. Well, there's no need to elaborate on the rest of the story. Sherlock's screams echoed throughout the hall. It was only then that Person B, C, and D finally approached Person A and whispered something to him. Boss, aren't you afraid of revenge from that kid for doing this? Faced with his subordinate's questioning, A just shrugged his shoulders and then answered slowly. No, I just gave him a complete childhood. Hearing A's words, the corners of B, C, and D's mouths twitched fiercely. Looking at Sherlock who was being beaten over there, and then looking at A who was standing calmly on the side with a greasy handprint on his shoulder, B, C, and D had reason to suspect that A was taking revenge. Otherwise, based on Sherlock's age, he is still a young man after all. How could it become a childhood? After watching this familiar circle kick for a while, A came back to his senses and looked at B, C, and D beside him and asked, by the way, what happened? Why are you all gathered here? Hearing the fake question, C took out a mobile phone from his trouser pocket and handed it to A. It seems Mr. Tony wanted to ask Mr. Sherlock about tomorrow's schedule, but found that Mr. Sherlock was not on the room. Then he called everyone to find us. We found that you were not in the room either. In the end, things inexplicably turned out like this. After hearing what C said, A was stunned for a moment, and then smiled a little embarrassedly. When they left just now, Sherlock rushed them too much and forgot to bring their phone. So, in this case, A also contributed to Sherlock's beating. A glanced at Sherlock, who was being kicked in the circle, with a guilty conscience, and decided to keep this matter to himself. Chapter 299 3-Day Trip to the Magic City 5. Finally, Sherlock led everyone back to the snack street they just visited with A. As a native of the Eagle Sauce region, having never seen the Rabbit Street scene before, he was instantly captivated. Beyond the atmosphere, the snack street also captivated everyone's taste buds. Unlike the exquisite dishes served at large restaurants, the snacks at the snack street were characterized by their rich flavors. If the flavors at those restaurants were surgically precise, each dish possessing its own distinct flavor, then the food at the snack street was a blanket assault. Sweet, sour, bitter, spicy, salty, and savory, all abounded on the palate. Beyond the food, the snack street's uniquely rabbit-inspired atmosphere captivated the group, even making them sigh at the beauty of being a social animal. As the saying goes, the everyday touch of life is most soothing to the human heart, and the statement is no joke. In Sherlock's impression, the only places that can truly embody the flavor of everyday life are the crowded snack streets and the morning markets in the Northeast. What? You're saying there aren't any such places in the Eagle Country, and you have to come to Rabbit Country to experience them? Sorry, there really aren't any. It's not that there aren't snack streets in the Eagle Country, there are indeed, but if you want that kind of everyday life, sorry, there aren't any. This is partly due to the population base in the Eagle Country. In the snack streets there, you always see more businesses than people, giving people a deserted feeling, as if the street might close down in the next second. It's also due to the food itself. While the snacks in Rabbit Country can fill you up, most of the time, you can treat them as cooked snacks, the main point being to liberate your taste buds. Most of the snacks in the Eagle sauce area are incredibly filling, their flavors derived from a variety of gooey sauces. The most famous is the Mexican taco, one of the most famous street food in the Eagle sauce area. But even a big eater like Sherlock can only finish 2 or 3, and each one tastes pretty much the same. Meanwhile, in the rabbit area, taking snacks like the grilled giant squid, Sherlock could easily show off 3 at once. And the most important thing is, each one tasted completely different. Is that even comparable? In this situation, almost everyone in Sherlock's group was completely engrossed in the feast. Even Sherlock's 5 stern uncles were incredibly excited. It was the first time in Sherlock's life that he had seen so many people smiling, excitedly discussing the food's deliciousness. Of course, most people refused to try things like stinky tofu and snail noodles, even though everyone was certain they were edible. But this thing was like durian, if some people rejected it, others would surely love it. Sherlock's 5 uncles were quite receptive to this strongly flavored treat, even seemingly unable to stop eating it. Sherlock wasn't surprised, though. These 5 uncles were all superb Special Forces soldiers. During training, Sherlock had witnessed these ruthless men stuffing a few ants into their mouths. To them, stinky tofu or snail noodles were merely slightly stinky foods, no problem at all. Because of Sherlock's gluttony, the already well-fed Sherlock was, under the pretext of digesting his food, formally assigned to run errands, responsible for buying a variety of snacks. Sherlock could only wait in line, glaring fiercely at his companion. Damn it. I was thinking of writing you a letter of praise, but based on the way you just took advantage of me, your letter is gone. I'm telling you, Sherlock kept sending these messages to Person A with his eyes, but unfortunately, Person A and Sherlock hadn't gotten to the point where they could understand each other's thoughts through a single glance, so they didn't receive Sherlock's resentful signals. Person A simply felt that Sherlock's eyes were filled with malice, but not too intense. In the end, Person A could only touch his nose awkwardly, silently queuing up with Sherlock to buy snacks. When Sherlock finally came back with the last snack, he was completely baffled by the scene in front of him. He had only gone out to buy snacks, so how come he came back to see everyone already drinking? Let's drink, anyway, this is normal in the snack street, but can you please tell me who the old man with Tony Lou is? How come one of you speaks English and the other speaks Chinese, and you can communicate without any obstacles, and even clink glasses? Okay, forget about the old man. After all, Sherlock's seen drunkards like that before. He's also seen Tony get drunk like that. But Black Widow, can you tell me where that little girl next to you is from? You two are looking at each other like crazy. And Black Widow, can you please take your hands off that little girl's Balenciaga in broad daylight? Tony and Black Widow, forget about that. The most outrageous thing is Sherlock's 5 uncles. Damn, they can't even learn to speak in those bunny words at home, and now you tell me what the hell you 5 uncles mean when you pronounce them so clearly? Okay, forget about your clear pronunciation, but can you tell me why you 5 grown men would get involved with a little girl who'd occasionally nibble on a scallion and chew on a large pork shoulder? And it's a 5-on-1 fight? Watching this scene, Sherlock felt his perception of these people shatter. Not just Sherlock, but even A, who was standing next to Sherlock, couldn't help but twitch his lips. But the most shocking thing was yet to come. Who knew what was wrong with that little girl? She'd actually managed to get Sherlock's 5 uncles drunk and unconscious. And most importantly, after all that, she acted like nothing had happened, blushing only slightly as she calmly took a bite of a scallion. Sherlock was completely stunned, unable to react. He stared intently at the girl still chewing the scallion, mentally pondering her anatomy. Meanwhile, Person A was also busy, frantically tugging at the old man and Tony. The two were already drunk, and even though they couldn't speak the same language, how could they understand each other and insist on swearing blood oaths right here and there? Person A couldn't understand, and was deeply shocked. Well, Person C and Person D weren't idle either. After all, Black Widow had practically been seduced by that little girl. If they didn't take action, she was about to go back to the hotel with Black Widow. It's just a fucking headache. Chapter 300, 3-Day Trip to the Magic City 6. Sherlock no longer wanted to recall how they got back, but he could only thank the sober women for their help. That night, Sherlock slept soundly. After all, Anyone trying to deal with 5 drunk, limp men would be just as exhausted as Sherlock. Considering the situation, Sherlock had already arranged with A, B, C, and D while helping his uncle back to his room. If the women wanted to go out tomorrow, C and D would be the ones to look after them. If Sherlock was right, Pepper Potts would probably lead all the women on a rampage through the shopping malls of Shanghai, buying everything from luxury goods to small goods. As it turned out, Sherlock's guess was spot on. Early in the morning, Pepper Potts and her group disappeared into the hotel, dragging C and D with them. Looking at the group of women with their eyes gleaming, A and B silently crossed C and D in their hearts. Sherlock was just rejoicing at having a reason not to join in this women's revelry when Tony stormed into Sherlock's room, a card in hand. Seeing Tony rush in, Sherlock was completely stunned. After all, Tony had drunk quite a bit yesterday, so logically, he should be incapable of getting up. Did Sherlock see his 5 uncles still lying in their rooms? How did you get up? Suddenly realizing something, Sherlock looked at Tony with a strange look as he rushed towards him, holding a card. Tony, already anxious, paused at Sherlock's words, staring at him in a daze before speaking unsurely. Maybe my liver is strong and I'm sobering up faster. Seeing Tony like this, Sherlock was immediately certain. Damn it, this guy is faking it. He just doesn't want to go shopping with Pepper Potts, so he's pretending to be drunk and unable to get out of bed. Seeing Sherlock's increasingly strange look, Tony finally decided to give up the struggle. Don't look at me like that. You know how powerful Pepper is when she's shopping. I'll give you a modified Raptor 6x6 when we get back. Just don't tell Pepper about this, deal? Sherlock agreed to Tony's request without hesitation. Seeing that Sherlock had agreed, Tony seemed to remember something and held up the card in his hand to Sherlock. Something's happened. Look at these 2 things. I found them in my pocket this morning. When Tony held the objects in his hand up to Sherlock, Sherlock realized that the so-called card he was looking at was actually 2 cards stacked together, and both of them looked incredibly familiar to Sherlock. Wow, Tony got back an ID and a bank card last night? Looking at the ID and bank card in his hand, Sherlock silently gave Tony a thumbs up. After Sherlock saw the photo and the information on the ID, Sherlock silently changed the thumbs up to 6. Well, it's no wonder Sherlock reacted that way. The ID in Sherlock's hand belonged to the old man who had insisted on becoming sworn brothers with Tony the previous night. If he was right, that bank card might actually be the old man's pension. Good thing Tony inherited the family business. If this were a real person, he'd be a complete prison blogger. Even those idiots in northern Myanmar couldn't just drink and take away someone's entire pension, right? Sherlock looked at Tony with such strange eyes that Tony was completely bewildered. He couldn't recall what happened last night, except for a vague memory of meeting a good friend and having a good time drinking together. Seeing Tony's clear yet foolish eyes, Sherlock finally sighed helplessly, changed his clothes, and dragged Tony towards A's room, recounting the incident that nearly led him to becoming sworn brothers. When Sherlock finished, Tony was completely stunned. Was this really him? What the hell? How could I do such a thing? Hong hong hua ho, half-dazed, pulled Sherlock to knock on A's door. A, opening the door, looked at Sherlock standing there, and Tony, who was still in a trance behind him, a question mark slowly forming in his head. After Sherlock finished explaining the whole story to A's eyes turned increasingly suspicious towards Tony. Goodness, at least this guy has money. If he had no money, he might be the world's biggest fraud ringleader. And damn, is this how you foreigners spend your money? He swore brotherhood with someone last night, and this morning he discovered he'd swindled their entire pension out of theirs. Staring at A's increasingly perplexed look, Sherlock finally decided to take advantage of the situation. He asked A to check the ID information, and then he and Tony would go with him to return the old man's belongings. The search proved to be a revelation. The old man's identity was quite something. A professor at Shanghai Doubleday University. They even figured out why the old professor was in a place like a snack street. He was there with his granddaughter. Remember that Balenciaga guy who was captivated by Black Widow's stunning beauty? That was the old professor's granddaughter. Person A's investigation lasted less than half an hour, and by the time Person A and Sherlock had explained the situation, Sherlock was completely consumed by a single thought: what a sin. To reassure the old man and prevent him from calling the police, Sherlock, after much deliberation, finally asked Person A to call the old man and explain the situation. He then, speechless, took Person A and Tony in a taxi and headed towards Shuangding University. Whether it was Person A's status that had any effect, or whether the old man truly valued Tony's supposed sworn brotherhood, he actually didn't call the police. He cheerfully gave Person A an address, saying they'd discuss anything once they got there. The address the old man gave was inside a building within Shuangding University. When Sherlock, Tony, and Person A hurriedly arrived, the old man was leisurely sipping tea in his office. After learning Tony's identity, the old man remained calm. He then offered to not call the police, but in exchange for not calling the police, he wanted Tony to teach the students a lesson, a serious theoretical lesson, not some kind of chicken soup for the soul. Tony excitedly agreed, even looking a bit eager to try it out to Sherlock. Sherlock could understand Tony, though, after all, Tony had never been a teacher before, so a bit of excitement was natural. Of course, the environment was also important. If it were New York, Tony probably wouldn't have responded to such a request, but since he was traveling, Tony was letting loose, wanting to experience everything he hadn't experienced before. However, just as Tony and the old man were discussing what to teach, a figure that Sherlock didn't expect, yet felt strangely familiar, entered the office. Sherlock jumped in surprise when he saw the figure. Holy crap! Yippee! End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.